supposedly. I don't know if I feel alive, but
Yeah, I know. I just rolled out of bed. You can tell, like,
I
on the
just got
phone.
back
I
from
love more
America, so
sleep.
I'm jet lagging like a fiend. So I've been awake since about 3.
Oh, stop. I don't have jet lag, and I feel like I'm jet lagging right now. Right. Oh yeah, that's much better EP. Although you could do with doing the opposite, turning it down. Yeah. No, no, it's grand, it's grand, it's grand. No, no, you can leave it there. Oh no, it's starting to pick up. Although it says I've got 3 people already watching.
Yeah, so if you're watching us futz with ourselves, everyone, you're welcome for this view into the real life of a YouTube creator.
Oh, stop. We're just getting like myself and the wife are literally just getting up. We're getting the coffee and everything going now, like because obviously myself and Rachel are on the other side of the world right now, over in the Pacific, where most of our viewers are like,
Actually, publish it in advance. Like
mm,
YouTube will push it, so people will actually like click on it to be notified of it in advance. So the
mm,
earlier
mm,
you
mm.
the earlier you schedule it, the better.
I think I just bombarded everything. What was it yesterday? I was literally because I had the brother over, and then I had my wife relaxing over in the house and all that stuff. So we were all just kind of chilled out for the last 2 weeks enjoying Christmas and that. And then it was the last 2 days because I was working away on the Kilkenny video as well, for which I have for tonight if you're in the Pacific, and obviously tomorrow if you're in Ireland and America. And so for the last few days I've been working away on the Kilkenny video, and then on what was it, the last 2 days then I tried to organize everything for this weekend, which is our live stream right now, and obviously the live stream for tomorrow where we're talking about clothing. So yeah, yeah, maybe I should just bombard people first thing, what was it, Monday, for what we're doing next week as well.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
yeah. One of which is the fact that we're actually covering the 12 days of Christmas this week, which is quite funny because I actually started, what was it, on, I think it was Monday, I had the short up. I'll check there now. But I posted up a short anyway this week. Yeah, yeah, it was on, what was it, Wednesday. So Wednesday I posted up a short on when was the real birthday of Christmas? Sorry, not Christmas, of Jesus,
Oh
because
God.
there's a massive debate on
You
the
did a
25th.
short on that?
I
There's
did a
like
short
entire
on that.
dissertations on it.
Oh, stop! It's messy. It's very,
It's
very messy. Because
messy.
like, yeah, yeah, yeah. I chucked it out there and I put a little theory in there, and straight away my comment section were debating away, which is not great for my algorithm. Like, um, but there's some people are very passionate about the 25th, and some people are like, oh, but I thought everybody knew about that, or clearly not everybody knows about that. That some people are debating if it was the 25th of March that Jesus was born, or was it the 25th of December if Jesus was born. And then it goes into the conspiracy theories of, well, if they didn't celebrate the birth of Jesus on the 25th, what did they celebrate on the 25th instead? Any theories on that, Rachel?
Oh, well, I mean, it's we stole that from the Romans. Like this is cultural misappropriation 101.
Yeah, yeah,
It's a
there's,
you've got Saturnalia, and then you've got the feast of or the feast of Sol Invictus, of the sun,
mm,
the inconquerable sun, because
yeah, yeah,
we're the earth is turning back towards having longer and longer days again. So even
mm,
everyone across the world celebrates, the solstice in some fashion.
yeah,
And I think it was Pope oh, I forget which of the early popes it was, who kind of looked around and said, well, all these pagan holidays, even if they're not technically pagan, but they're still doing the thing. So we need to make sure the thing is relevant to, Christianity. And
yeah.
so they just took it wholesale. So in my mind, there's no way that Jesus was actually born anywhere near December 25th.
Yeah, I was kind
Any,
of thinking that with the
yeah.
common sense, because if a child is born in the dead of winter, it's, I don't want to sound bad or anything about this, but it's kind of difficult to keep him alive during the dead of winter if he's
Well,
born, you know?
even okay, they're in Palestine, which is technically a warm place, except
It's
that
true.
at nighttime it gets super cold
Yeah.
out out in those desert-like places. And so
Mm,
yeah, if he's born in the night in a manger, it's not going to go so well necessarily.
Yeah,
But
yeah. Um,
people were better about dealing with that kind of thing, about those kind, because before central heating, you just dressed like it was always kind of cold. So, it
That's very, very true. Because in Ireland, you obviously have the conspiracy theory that it was Celtic paganism with the was it the night of solstice, where the sun comes in through Newgrange and all that stuff. So there's a lot of conspiracy theories that the Irish were sun worshipping, because we don't definingly celebrate Christmas on Christmas until the coming of Cromwell and all of them coming to Ireland. And then all of Ireland is celebrating Christmas on Christmas Day.
which is weird
Until
because Cromwell outlawed the celebration of Christmas.
Yeah, I was going to say that as well, that he's the one that outlaws it, right? But he's the one that enforces the English rule. And it was also James in Britain that was also enforcing Christmas, because it's really so James enforces it because in Britain, when James takes over, you have pockets of England just doing all kinds of stuff. Because not only do you have a kind of disarray because of the coming of all these new Lutheran faiths and the Church of Scotland and the Church of England and Presbyterian. So you have
Yeah.
pockets of Britain doing all kinds of stuff. So James is trying to hammer down all these different faiths and stuff. So he's like, okay, so when it comes down to the debate between Christmas and Christmas being on the 25th of December or March, we're going with December, and that's that. And of course, so when Cromwell takes over, without really trying to actually push it or push it not, he kind of enforces British rules and British culture onto the Irish
Mm.
by physical force. So even if he's
Which
outlawing it,
always works,
because
by the way. Enforcing culture by force, yeah, that's a winner.
yeah, especially yeah, that's getting dark quite quick. But yeah, so it's not until Cromwell that finally we don't have pockets of Ireland celebrating it, but we have one um, Christian force, because also Ireland has what they call Celtic paganism. Sorry, not Celtic paganism, Celtic Christianity. So, what is Celtic Christianity? Celtic Christianity is when you have a group of people who still believe that they're Roman Catholic, but they're kind of doing their own thing, in particular around Easter. So, they're celebrating Easter in like different
Well,
times and stuff, going off of their calendar and that.
but I mean,
Um,
that's what's happening all across Europe, right? That's everywhere has kind of their the mainstream Christianity that everyone kind of acknowledges, and then there's always the local flavor, which is nearly always based on whatever you know pagan heathen
mm,
faith they had before Christianity, and
yeah,
depending on where you are, it's more or less prominent. The
mm,
Easter Bunny is a prime example
yeah, yeah.
of that.
Because that's even a debate. Like even if you were to go down the route of okay, so for Ireland, Celtic paganism came down from sorry, Christmas comes down from Celtic paganism, and it's the sun worshipping. You're still going into the debate of okay, so what areas celebrated this sun worshipping? Because not all Celtic paganism is the same. Like it literally is different village per village per village. That's why it's nice to kind of hammer it down in Dublin. Because if we continue this conversation, we could go on all day. But they did it somewhere different here or somewhere different there. We'll definitely try to hammer it down around. Well, I will anyway, around Dublin. Um, and Dublin, even on top of that, it still doesn't really hammer it down until Cromwell comes in and enforces it really. So we still have even pockets of ideas because we also have the Viking influence that comes into Dublin, because Dublin's not celebrating the Celtic tradition on the 25th of December, on the first day of Christmas. They're in fact celebrating the Norse understanding of Christmas, which is bringing in the Yule log and stuff. So
Oh,
it,
so
it
so
is.
I'm that so everyone thinks the Yule log is Norse. It's not.
Was it not?
No, no.
Elaborate.
Florence, Italy also had a Yule log. Um,
Mm,
and it was especially in Tuscany. So it was either called Il Zocco or Il Chocco, and there was a whole ceremony, a massive, big ceremony on the 24th about lighting this. And I'm confident this comes from ancient Rome because they
Mm,
would light the Yule log, and the Yule log was either a giant olive trunk or
mm,
oak, and they would,
yeah.
and it had to be big enough. There were two versions of the ceremony. Either you got one big enough to last until Epiphany,
Mm,
or you lit one on Christmas Eve, and then you lit one on the 31st.
mm,
And they decorated it, and then they put it in the fireplace or whatever they had if they didn't. But most by the 15th century, especially, everyone had chimneys and fireplaces in Italy,
mm,
civilized country and all that.
mm,
Um, and they would light it and let it burn, and then the next morning they would collect the ashes and they would spread the ashes on the fields
mm.
for prosperity and good luck. And if that doesn't sound like ancient Roman pagan practice, I don't know what does.
That is fascinating.
Yeah.
The fact that we have two different Italian influences, allegedly, both of the influence coming in from Rome itself with the Christian feasts and festivals and stuff, but also the Norse interpretation of that coming back into Dublin as well, is definitely very, very interesting how we have kind of waves of interpretation and stuff going into Dublin. Jesus, where have you even started? That's quite interesting. Um, because obviously we have the Christian interpretation, the Rome interpretation of this. So we have the understanding that Celtic paganism is where, and this is all still kind of out there. We don't really have this hammered down in actual stone. Is that we do believe that they may have been sun worshipping, and then suddenly we have the arrival of Christianity, and that's where we start bringing in this kind of major belief that we're waiting for the three wise men to come in, and this is the first day that we're waiting for the three wise men to come. And, it's a blessing, isn't it, or something, that the three wise men are coming to
Yeah,
see
so they
Jesus
bring
after birth.
their gifts. They bring three gifts, right? Frankincense, frankincense, myrrh, and oh God, what's the third one? I, I this is what happens when you do a live stream right after flying from Seattle to Seoul. Um, uh, Frankincense, myrrh, and oh, gold. Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But the myrrh represents death, because that's associated with corpses, right? You burn myrrh
Mm,
and you anoint their bodies in myrrh.
mm, mm,
And then they represent each of the stages of life: gold, youth; frankincense, middle age; and then myrrh is the final stage in life. But actually, the myth of the three magi it's a myth because the Bible, the New Testament, doesn't mention the number. It doesn't give them names.
yeah.
And so that kind of is created in like the 13th century in Europe.
Mm, mm,
And because they want to really sort of they want, they like legends, they like stories, and they want something that's more solid than this kind of nebulous New Testament stuff.
yeah.
Because how can you reenact a nebulous thing? Because medieval people are all about reenactment, and so how
Mm,
can you reenact the birth of Christ and the Epiphany if you don't know how many magi are there?
yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so they kind of come up with this, and the Magi also represent like one of each of the continents of the
Mm,
known world
mm,
at the time: Europe, Asia, and Africa. So that's
mm,
why you have a king, Gaspar, who is, black, and you have one who looks kind of vaguely Tatar, and the other
mm,
is very pale, is very European, right?
yeah.
So, the Feast of the Epiphany is actually in the Middle Ages the thing, way more than Christmas Day is, because
Mm,
it's all about the acknowledgement of Christ as the Son of God, is what it's about. It's about these
yeah.
three wise men coming from the East and basically saying, look, here's the Son of God, here is your Messiah. Until that
Mm,
point, he's just any old baby born in a manger behind an
yeah.
inn outside of Bethlehem. Um, so that's why in a lot of places to this day, Twelfth Night is a bigger celebration. Scotland, for instance, Twelfth Night is a bigger deal than Christmas is.
Mm,
And you can actually tell where people come from based on whether they celebrate Christmas Eve or Christmas Day, because there's a
mm,
north-south divide in that. In the Mediterranean, in the Middle Ages, Christmas Eve was the thing. That's when you lit the Yule log, and that
mm,
was sort of the end of the horrible, horrible is a strong word, but the period of privation that was Advent, when people fasted for four
mm,
weeks, 4 weeks of fasting. And
Mhm.
so then you've got these 12 days of feasting to contrast that. So that's, we don't do that anymore. I'm Catholic and I don't know anyone who actually abstains from anything during the period of Advent, right?
Mm. I think in Ireland you could find a few people that do it. It's gotten more and more radical over the years, as in you'd have to be pretty radical in Ireland to do it these days. When I was growing up, I knew a few people that were doing it, mostly old people and stuff. But even the celebration of the play, the major play, as we called it in Ireland, when I was growing up, it used to be done before Christmas. So it wasn't even done on the 12th day of Christmas, like it would have been done back in the medieval period and stuff. It was actually done like, I think, months to no wait, it would have been done that month. And it was done around the children. It was the children that had to organize all this when I was growing up. And yeah, um, yeah, even the comment below saying stating that like hardly anybody does it these
Yeah,
days. But,
but it's something that people need, and this is what all these videos about medieval Christmas, they never mention this context, that
yeah.
coming into Christmas is 4 weeks of fasting, of
Mm.
denying yourself, including supposedly sex, but who knows if that was really true.
um,
So fasting and deprivation, and and it's getting darker, and it's getting depressing, and things are turning brown, and so at the end of that period of privation, to then have this 12 days of not just celebration. What the other thing people don't realize is that medieval people had way more days off than we do in the modern world.
yeah, we
But
did.
the 12 days of Christmas were sacrosanct. They were closed.
Mm,
I actually found a statute by the Butchers Guild in Florence that says that the butchers must be closed, and it provides specific instructions for what they are allowed to do during Christmas, because obviously you don't want meat to just rot. And it actually
mm,
talks about where they're allowed to receive the dead bodies of the cows so that they can butcher them to provide meat for these feasts. But it was
mm,
so important that people not work during this time. So you've got 4 weeks of hard work because
mm,
you're finishing up the harvest, you're making preparations for the winter and deprivation. And then you've got these 12 days of insanity, and or
mm.
12 days off, plus the desire to really party. And that's a great combination for one hell of a raucous holiday. Makes our, modern Christmas is boring. Boring.
Yeah, is to a certain degree. I suppose it depends how serious you take the kind of fasting. Because I know in my house, all right, we did gather up as many snacks as possible. Like even today, my mom and dad do gather up as much junk food as possible. And it's like, oh, well, no junk food now until Christmas, yourself. Because that even now, like my mother has sent me so much junk food for Christmas Day. Like I literally have buckets of it over there still, like the wife happy out, like, so we kind of do celebrate it to a certain degree in Ireland. Well, people I know anyway, of
Well,
gathering up as
but
much junk food as possible, like.
sure, junk food, but we're talking 12 days of feasts,
Mm,
where
that's
you're
very, very
eating
true.
where you're eating 4 kinds of fish and 5 kinds of meat every night,
Mm,
or every day, because usually the feast took place like mid-afternoon starting, and then kind of then sort of went all night. And then you've got the wine and ale and cider and beer, and wine.
mm,
Christmas was about drinking.
mm, 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 mm.
And that's kind of true everywhere where I was able to find information on medieval Christmas practices, because it is shockingly hard to find primary source evidence of medieval Christmas practices.
Mm.
That could be because the chroniclers, or the people who would have written about that stuff, were too drunk during the
Yeah.
period and so didn't really remember it very well.
Yeah, we have that all right in Celtic literature. We have a priest who's up in the Alps in the mainland of Europe. He's an Irish priest, and he writes in Irish that he was drunk the previous night. He writes it. He's writing in Latin, and then up in the very top, he's written in Irish that he is drunk from the night before. So yeah, that's very, very true. That a lot of the monks were alcoholics and
Yeah,
were
I mean
enjoying
it
themselves.
and speaking of monks and religious practice, so the in the modern world we tend to think of priests and in all faiths, in any faith, as being some kind of divine, like living on this other plane of existence and not engaging in the sort of joys and pleasures that we mortals do, right? There's this
mm,
almost automatic viewing of people in spiritual leadership positions as that.
mm.
But they're real people too, and they also need a break. So even
Yeah.
in the church, the monks, the priests, the bishops, they would all just they would let go during the
Mm.
holidays, and they would elect boy bishops. I don't know if you've heard of the practice of boy bishops.
I know a small bit of it. I have come across it a few times, all right, but I wouldn't mind hearing your interpretation on boy bishops.
Yeah, so boy bishops were, and this is different than the Lord of Misrule. So sometimes there's confusion. People think it's the same thing.
I thought it
Two
was the same
different,
thing, so there you go.
two different positions of chaos
Mm,
in the 12 days of Christmas. So
mm,
the 12 days of Christmas were associated with topsy-turvy, with the world inverted. And that
mm.
definitely happened. That was part of Saturnalia as
Yeah.
well. So it was about inverting the order. So the poor become the powerful kind of for a little while put themselves on the bottom and play act at being peasants or whatever.
Mm,
The boy bishop was one of the boys from the choir who was
mm.
elected to be a bishop for the day. And in different parts of Europe, this was practiced from like Italy to France, England,
Yeah. We
and
have the
they
same
actually
thing.
had these weird, crazy ceremony where
Thank you.
they basically consecrated the boy bishop. And then the boy bishop would preach sermons that were, ribald and inappropriate. And he would actually perform marriages
Mm,
that were to last one day, just one day. But they were legitimate. So
mm,
anything that resulted from that marriage was legitimate, child
mm.
wise.
Yeah.
But at the end of the next day, or the dawn of the next morning, the marriage was absolved. So it was a chance to to maybe
Oh, a bit
test
wild.
drive a potential partner. I don't know.
Oh well, even in both Irish and Celtic, what was it? The Irish and Saxon literature, you can find people drinking on the start of the end of the night. What was it? The At night they would start drinking and stuff, and they would have a marriage. This happened throughout the entirety of the early medieval period, and then the following day, they would go to the priest, begging the priest, "I didn't mean it. I was drunk." Da da da. And I'll elaborate that quickly in a second. I'll just go to O'Reilly's comment there about how the Orthodox Christians in Dublin still take the 12 days of Christmas very seriously, which is something I'm very ignorant about. I do have friends who are Romanians, all right. Not part of the Romanian community, but who are Romanians, and but they're Roman Catholic. So when it comes down to the Orthodox faith, I'm actually extremely ignorant, especially in Dublin and stuff. Um, Romanian nuns. You see, that's the thing, O'Reilly. You'd have to educate me about that because when it comes down to the Orthodox faith in Dublin, very, very ignorant. One Romanian girl I did know, she was Roman Catholic. So although I'm aware of Romanian culture and practices and stuff, when it comes down to the Orthodox faith, very, very ignorant. Rachel, do you know anything about the Orthodox faith?
I mean, I know I've traveled through Bulgaria and I've been to monasteries and churches there, and I learned a little bit, but it's fairly opaque to me. What actually
Yeah.
modern Orthodox, I know more about medieval Orthodox practice than I do about modern. So for all
Mm.
I know, modern Orthodox practice is very much like medieval, but I don't.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
that's literally saying I don't know. Yeah. Oh, do the Irish celebrate Hogmanay? I don't think
Oh,
so.
I'm completely ignorant to Hogamy. Just
No,
give me a quick
yeah,
second.
that's a Scottish thing. I don't think the
Mm.
Irish do. Um,
Give me a quick shot second because I'm living down in, well, my family are down in the North Cork area. Yeah, straight away, it is definitely Scottish. Um, it is Scottish, the old world symbols for the new world. Is it a, I'm curious, is that a Norse pagan? Oh, it is. It is both Gaelic and Norse. But that's celebrated way up in the hills. That's funny that we don't celebrate that in Dublin and stuff. But it could be what we were saying earlier about Cromwell coming in and enforcing more kind of British culture and laws. Um, It'd be interesting to find out if that was celebrated in Dublin before the coming of Cromwell. Was it Henry VIII and then Cromwell coming in?
Right. Well,
That's fascinating.
on the other hand, there were different kinds of Norse that settled in Ireland than there necessarily were in Scotland. Um,
Yeah.
so it could, and the way Christianity, was practiced in especially in the Highlands of Scotland was not the same as it was practiced in Ireland. I mean,
Mm,
at a global level, yes, sort of the tenets are the same, obviously, but
yeah, yeah,
the sort of local, the sort of pagan practices that sort of carried through would be different. So it doesn't actually
yeah.
surprise me.
That's very true.
It's like some things, there are some universal concepts like the solstice. That is something that humans across the world in the northern, in the far enough away from the equator anyway,
Mm,
that we all seem to celebrate, and that all seems to have influenced when Christmas gets settled in the
mm,
Western church. But then you get down to the nitty-gritty and the details are different. It's
mm,
it's it's it's
mm,
like in Florence, their big day was the Epiphany, and that's the 6th. So the 12th
mm.
night is technically the night before the Epiphany, which a lot of people
Yeah,
don't know. It's January 5th.
mm,
But 12th day is the Epiphany.
yeah,
And the Epiphany in Italy was celebrated sort of everywhere by the processions of the Magi, and they would reenact what they viewed as the
mm,
procession of the Magi, which probably has zero to do with the biblical, what actually may have happened in 2025 years ago.
mm,
Um,
mm.
they actually dressed themselves in sumptuous garments, and they had horses. And if you've probably seen Gozzoli's procession of the Magi in the Medici Palace. It's the super famous fresco
I
that's
haven't been to Florence yet to look at that one.
well, that's
Um,
it's a famous piece of art, though, that kind of, whenever you look up Medici, anything about the Medici, it's the central piece of artwork that crops
yeah,
up. But
sounds
that is
cool. Mm,
probably depicting an actual procession, the procession of the Magi procession that actually happened,
mm,
in which Lorenzo plays the golden boy in the
mm,
procession. So that was their big thing in sort of
mm,
Italy and Florence, was these processions of the Magi. But that wasn't a thing in other places so much.
mm. Yeah, that's very, very true. So let's quickly go through the comment section. Once again, all bitching about
Oh yeah.
Cromwell. Yeah, I just want to quickly touch on that as well, because obviously you have all these theories, and there must have been pockets inside of Ireland that were celebrating different influences and stuff. Because as we were saying last week, the Fitzgeralds were definitely aware of the how Florence was celebrating Christmas, and they most likely, there's a good chance you had a good few, because it took so long to travel from Kerry all the way to Florence. There's a good chance that a lot of the Fitzgeralds that did arrive in Florence would have spent, just like John of the Geraldines, who was from Florence, who, when he came to Ireland, planned to stay there for a certain period of time. I reckon it would have been the same thing for the Fitzgeralds from Ireland that had gone to Florence. They
Right.
would have stayed there for a certain time, so they would have seen the Florence traditions and stuff, and there's a good chance they could have brought it back to Kerry and stuff. Because even what you were saying there, um, about the world being upside down for a few days with boy priests and stuff. We have a similar festival that happens in August called the Puck Fair. And
Ah.
this is an August festival that happens in Kerry. And although there's influences throughout Ireland from the Puck Fair itself happens in Kerry and still happens today. Although it's believed to be a pagan festival that they're constantly trying to wipe out Christians and stuff, especially the likes of Cromwell. It's still the Kerry people want to celebrate this festival. And in this festival, they actually get a goat, and the goat is the king of Kerry for that day. And it's everything is upside down. Like, boys can tell fathers what to do. Women are dressed as men. It's a day about being the
Right.
other way around. So it's very interesting that yes, we can actually find in Kerry with the summer festival that's still celebrate. Although most of Europe doesn't celebrate the summer festival anymore, the summer festival is still celebrating Kerry with the Puck Fair. So even as you said that, with that, we can still find influences of the world being upside down in Kerry, and Kerry being linked from the Fitzgeralds into Florence and stuff. So I think that's quite interesting in itself. What else do we
Mm.
have? Oh, and of course, regardless if there is a debate, if we're dealing with the fact that we're celebrating the sun with the winter solstice on the first day of Christmas, or if we're celebrating the birth of Christ, we still have the midnight. The celebration still kicks off with the midnight mass, which, according to some of the research I was doing, isn't as is isn't as is isn't as important. God, I'm tripping over that a lot. As the Easter. So in Ireland, Easter was more important than Christmas. So
Right.
today in Ireland, Christmas is way more important than Easter is. But back in the medieval period, Easter was in fact way bigger a deal in Ireland than Christmas was. And the reason for that is that because they're still trying to get by, because the winter in Ireland is really harsh. So they can't go as wild in Ireland as they can do in a lot of other places in Europe. So they're trying to keep their resources nice and protected until Easter, and then they can go completely wild, in my interpretation of the literature. Um, Rachel, is that the same like in Italy and stuff? Is it the fact that Christmas is a bigger deal on the 25th, or
So
is Easter a bigger deal?
so Christmas, it's funny. Christmas is a bigger deal in terms of celebration.
Mm,
It's a massive, but it's secular. I mean, it's people
right.
complain about we need to put Christ back in Christmas today. Well, yes, they may have attended mass 3 times a day throughout the Christmas holidays,
Mm,
but in between attending mass, these people were going crazy. They
yeah.
so Christmas was much more about actually partying
Mm,
because hopefully to celebrate a successful harvest because otherwise you're not doing very much partying. So it was about letting your hair down. It was a kind of a chance for society to let off steam,
mm,
right? And Easter, by contrast, in the Mediterranean as well, in France, in Italy, was very solemn.
mm,
That was that was not a time for revelry. It was not a time for ribaldry. It was a
mm,
time for earnest worship and solemnity,
mm,
right? Because there's not much revelry worthy about the passion of Christ.
mm.
That's it's a pretty gruesome episode in scripture, right? So
Ah,
even in terms of, I would say in terms of religious practice, Easter
mm,
is definitely, even in Italy, the more important, the more prestigious is not the right word, but the more religious of the sets of holidays. And I
mm,
actually had an author once hire me as a consultant, and he asked me what sort of revelry and feasts would be conducted on Easter, and I said none. um, Not until the resurrection, right?
mm.
Not
Yeah.
until the resurrection. And the lead up to that, it's a lot of grim worshiping and the trivium, the Easter vigil. So I would agree that, and I would expect that's possibly true throughout Christian Europe, is
Mm.
that Easter is the more religiously important holiday, whereas Christmas is just, and let's see what kind of hate I can get in the comments for this statement. Christmas is just a reappropriated pagan celebration.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Like I kicked off that debate with the short this week, and I got all kinds of reactions. Obviously, my chat's regular, so we won't get well, we probably won't get anyone too radical in the comment section today. But my short that I posted up,
right.
saying
That
Jesus.
oh yeah, that probably got pushed in front of lots of people.
Oh yeah, yeah, Jesus' real birthday, and I had all kinds of reactions. And I did, don't get me wrong, there was nobody in there that was disrespectful. Sometimes I put shorts up. Like I had I remember we were bitching about this, the Anglo-Irish post I had up. It's grand right now. Don't get me wrong, I get a few random ones, but when I first posted that up, the Anglo-Irish short on my channel, I had people just being completely disrespectful.
Oh
They would
yeah.
just turn around, and the first thing they said, they disagreed with me, fair enough, and then you'd look for the argument, which I did get for a lot. The majority of people, they would disagree and they would have their argument. But some people, ooh, instead of having an argument, it was just complete. They were coming out, I couldn't repeat now that I'm live, but it was very disrespectful. There was no argument in there, and I couldn't even see. I could understand if someone would leave a comment saying, "Look, I just disagree with what you're saying," but there's no need to start name calling and stuff. And that's what I got a good chunk of. So thank God, right now that one, there's no name calling or anything. Everybody's just saying, "Well, I disagree with you. This is the reason why." Da da da. So far, people have been very respectful on all sides. So I'm very grateful for that. Um, where
But
are we going now?
the other thing about the debate about dates, and this is something most modern people don't realize, the our calendar has shifted a couple of times over the last
Big
2000
time.
years.
Yeah.
We've
You
we've
have to
added
see. Yeah.
it's
You see
what
this.
what is now December 25th wasn't December 25th 600 years ago.
Mm, we have to cover this when you're starting university for Celtic literature. You have to sit down and understand the changing of the calendar straight away, because we have an argument at the very start of our Celtic literature between the North, what was it, the Nael, who were the kings up in the north of Ireland, and then the kings of Munster, because not only are they fighting over the high kingship, the Ardrea, but they're also uh, the south of Ireland supports Rome and their interpretation of the calendar, which, as you pointing out there, is constantly changing. And then the Nails up in the north of Ireland, they support the Celtic Christian interpretation, so their own interpretation of when Easter is. And Easter is a huge deal compared to Christmas. Christmas is like, oh well, because Ireland, they're still trying to get by, so it's not that big of a deal. But Easter is like, oh, we need to get this right. And even Britain next door, they get involved with the argument and everything, like, and this is pure from the thing of the Enale versus Munster. This is politics, but there is radical monks up in the mountains of Ireland, sorry, the hills of mountain Ireland, and they go into
Yeah,
isolation. They
the
can't
hills.
handle this. Yeah, so when this gets enforced in, they just go way up in the mountains, like they can't handle the change in Easter and stuff. So as our point is, even we might turn around now and say, well, they were celebrating on the 25th. Were they though? Because the
Yeah.
calendar is constantly changing. So even on top of that, that's quite interesting in itself.
I mean, the when they shift from the Gregorian, to the Gregorian calendar, there are
Mm,
people who start writing letters in, and they date it both ways,
mm,
right? So we have all this correspondence right after that official shift where everyone's dating their letters both ways, just so everyone knows the date on which this letter was written. So,
mm.
it's that's why a lot of dates in history are kind of fudgeable. uh, because one, the chroniclers aren't exactly always faithful about providing the right date, even in their own era, and then you have to account for the shift in calendars.
Right.
Because I,
The,
'cause I
the
think there's been,
best the
yeah,
best way to see that straight away, if you type in UCC, what was it? UCC, Celtic literature, I think, or the annals. So UCC annals, right? And you look at one set of annals, and then you look at the other set of annals, which is made by a rival to it or clan. Straight away, the dates are different. Even the dates of the kings and stuff are completely different. And that's because they're following, not only are they probably written at different times, but they're following different calendars. So, God, when you're a historian, even if not even being a historian, if you were to look it up now on the UCC website, you're going to get confused. So imagine if you're a professional academic and you're looking at this and you're just like, ooh, and at least we're doing it for fun. Like professional
right.
academics have to take this very seriously when it comes down to the dates and stuff. And now they have to look at this and it's like, oh, this is going to be a difficult one. Just to answer Ryan's question there, Ryan, can we answer that one tomorrow? Because we're actually doing an entire stream over on Rachel's channel on clothing, and I'll actually dig up all my notes and stuff for then. So if you don't mind waiting until tomorrow, Ryan, and I'll actually post the link after this. I'll post the link over for Rachel's channel
Oh
onto
yeah.
ours, and we'll actually talk about that tomorrow because you're actually bang into what we're talking about tomorrow on Rachel's channel. If you don't mind waiting until then, Ryan. Um, so where are we? Let's talk about the second day of Christmas because That's really controversial in Ireland,
Boxing
which
Day?
is Saint Stephen's Day.
Oh,
And
St.
that sounds,
Stephen's Day. Yeah.
yeah, even today. So straight away we have Cromwell. Cromwell walks up and he's trying to ban Christmas, right? And the problem is, even after St. Stephen's Day is gone, depending on what side of the political side you're on. So you have in Ireland, we have one side that celebrates St. Day, and then you've got the other side that celebrates Boxing Day. So it's really controversial in Ireland. Is straight away the feast of St. Stephen's Day. Um, I don't think it's so controversial in Italy, and
It's well, it's just celebrated.
yeah,
It is so, most people don't realize, especially people who aren't from, the Catholic aren't Catholic, that there are actually seven holidays
mm,
that fall in those 12 days of Christmas, holy days.
mm,
There's different saints, and there's the Feast of the Innocents and sort of that. So Saint Stephen's Day is a day that's given it's there's a big feast held on that day, and it's not
mm,
controversial. It's just done. The most probably the most splendid Christmas court possibly in all of the 15th century Europe, and not just Italy, was the court of Milan,
mm,
actually under the Sforza, and Galeazzo Maria Sforza, who was an infamous character, to put it mildly,
mm,
took it up like an extra 3 levels when he inherited the dukedom. And he
mm,
started basically treating himself and acting as though he were a sovereign in his own right,
mm,
even though he wasn't. He was in fealty to the emperor, actually. And by that point, it was actually only kings, emperors, and popes who were supposed to knight people.
mm,
But Galeazzo Maria Sforza said, "Yeah, whatever, man. I'm a prince. I'm going to do this." And so on Christmas, he would specifically knight. He would actually have a knighting ceremony for 12 people.
mm,
He was very fond of drawing parallels between himself and Jesus, apparently, by
mm,
doing things in sets of 12.
mm,
Um, so he would actually choose 12 people to knight at Christmas, and St. Stephen's Day was usually the day on which they were knighted.
mm,
So, yeah, St. Stephen's Day was a big deal in the sense of it was a day to be extra feasty, to be
mm,
extra revelrous, in Italy, and it thankfully, Italy didn't have any. Thankfully, none of
mm,
the Reformation didn't cause the same chaos there that it caused in other places. The Catholic Church's response to the Reformation did, but that's a different
yeah.
question.
Because obviously we have a lot of fighting because of Cromwell and stuff coming in. Because it does make me wonder if it was the case in Germany as well. But most of this stuff happened after the medieval period and stuff. For the medieval period itself, it was just pockets of who was celebrating what. For the most part, it would have been if you went down to the southeast of the country. So obviously in Dublin, Bunratty Castle, Blarney Castle, this would have been the day on the second day when peasants, people from the countryside, would have gone into the settlements of the O'Briens with Bunratty Castle, the McCarthys with Blarney Castle, into Kerry with the Fitzgeralds, and obviously into Cork and Dublin. And they would have the lords and ladies would have been feasting for the last 2 days, and they would have given their extra food to the peasants, the people from the
Hmm.
countryside and stuff.
Right.
So it would have been a day when the lords and ladies of Ireland would have, anything that was left up on their table, they would have gathered up and they would have given to the people of the countryside and stuff. And that would have happened in the southeast of the country, the Anglo-Irish areas, as they refer to
Right.
them in the 15th century. Um, in the north west of the country, it would have been more complicated because you have the likes of the O'Neills and the O'Donnells don't really have the we're up in the air society. They're kind of more down with the people, the O'Neills and the O'Donnells. However, it's not entirely there. They would have had a certain level of, being up there, but it would not have been so radical as it was in the southeast of the country. In the southeast of the
Mm.
country, that's where you have the big towering castles that the likes of the McCarthys and the O'Briens had, where the peasants would have came in and it would have been like really blowing them away if they went to the higher parts of the castle and stuff to pick up their food and stuff from the lords and ladies of the castle. Like it would have been absolutely magnificent for them and definitely an experience for them. So the second day of Christmas, especially for the peasantry, must have been magnificent. At the same time, the Fitzgeralds and the O'Briens in particular, because the Fitzgeralds and O'Briens are married into each other, and so on that day, the two of them would have gone chasing deer and various other animals in the forests and stuff. So it was a day of hunting for the likes of the O'Briens and the Fitzgeralds and stuff,
Uh,
which it really does capture that kind of medieval idea of, these two kind of earls in their own right, dressed up in their fancy stuff, and the wild animals going out to capture them and stuff, and then bring it back to the castle and stuff. So that whole romantic idea is definitely captured on the second day of Christmas. Um, we move on to the third day.
Yeah, so it's really hard to let me see. The third day of Christmas is the
That's the
27th. So
St.
that's
John one in Ireland.
that's St. John. So is that St. John the Baptist? Yes. No, that can't be. St.
Uh,
John the Baptist is
even
in June.
evangelist, I have heard.
Yeah, right, the evangelist. Yeah, St. John the
Yeah.
Evangelist. Yeah.
Mm,
So, the it depending on, is in a lot of places it's hard to pin down exactly what happened on which day of Christmas
mm,
unless it was the big thing. Um,
yeah.
the third day was just, another day
Yeah.
for mass. You attended mass first thing in the morning. Everyone went to
Mm,
mass, and of course, for those of you who don't know what a medieval mass was like in the church, as it was called, what
mm,
we call the Catholic Church now, it was
yeah.
not it was not as participatory
Mm,
as mass is now. Now people go to church and they think they're going to sing songs and they're going to pray and but a medieval mass was much well, there was a screen between you and the priest and the
mm,
celebrants, and they did most of the singing. The congregation would just occasionally respond, but it was a much more solemn occasion and not nearly as participatory. So mass also didn't last very long necessarily.
mm.
A high mass could last for hours, but just as kind of your standard everyday mass was like a 20-minute affair. It wasn't
Yeah,
forever.
because I have it here in my notes that in like the likes of Blarney Castle and Bronaghy Castle and then Cork and Dublin and stuff, people would have started to slow down at this point. The third day, definitely around the southeast of the country, is more of a relaxing day. You're spending with the children, and there's storytelling as well. So the children, everybody's just eating up the leftovers. The children are
Mm.
relaxing next to the fire. The old one, the nanny or the storyteller would have gathered up the children, and then from that point after dinner, that's when the storytelling happens. And still, once again, we have that nice romantic medieval thing of the Lord just relaxing next to the fire, the children next to the storyteller or nanny, and of course the lady then just doing her knitting and stuff. So I think on the third day it was more of a relaxed day by my
So
interpretation of it.
so in the courts of on mainland Europe and even within the households, gaming was a big deal. Lots
Yeah.
of gaming, dicing,
Mm,
cards, chess. I found that Galeazzo Maria Sforza, he was so fond of gambling that he would give people money so they could keep gambling against him.
mm,
Give it, not lend it. Give it, just so that he would have someone against whom to play. And he was so fond of chess that he would
mm,
actually commission chessboards specifically for Christmas. And they were so used that they were to be unpainted because the paint would just wear away.
mm.
So gambling and gaming was a big deal. Dancing was a big deal on the continent and even in England. There's and disguisings. Did you do any? Is mumming a thing that happens in Ireland?
There could be, but it's not written in my notes.
Yeah.
So I'm aware of that one.
So in Northern Europe, in France, in Scandinavia, and in England, they would dress up in masks of animals, and they
Mm,
would go from door to door singing and dancing, and they would demand food. This is
that
kind of
does
where
sound
the
like something
tradition,
we did as well.
yeah, this is kind of where the tradition of the Christmas caroling comes from, except in its
Mhm.
original variant, it was scary and potentially violent because if you didn't
Yeah.
give the carolers the thing
Mhm.
they asked for, you could face some issues.
Mm,
So, there's a letter from the Paston letters, where Margaret Paston writes to her husband who's gone for Christmas, and she's so heartbroken. It's actually really touching. This letter shows the kind of deep emotional connection a husband and wife could have in the 15th century. She says
mm,
that Christmas she will feel like half a widow without him, she actually says.
mm,
But she's also writing specifically to tell him how the celebrations are going to be at the local lady's estate manor, because
mm,
the lord of the manor has just died, and so
mm,
she's in mourning. And apparently, the only things that are allowed during Christmas when you're mourning, according to Lady Morley, you may
mm,
not dance, there shall be no looting, there shall be no singing. You are
mm.
allowed to play dice at table, you are allowed to play quiet card games, and you are
Oh,
allowed to play chess. That is what
mm,
you are allowed to do at Christmas time when you are in mourning in England,
oh,
apparently.
mm, mm,
So
mm,
so there seems to be a really big emphasis on in between the feasting and in between mass of there's a lot of gaming happening.
mm, mm,
Oh,
mm,
and
mm.
also a violent form of soccer rugby. I call it soccer
Oh,
rugby
yeah.
because because that's the descriptions of it sound pretty much like soccer and rugby got had a horrible baby where people die. They would actually play this game, and it was played at all levels of society. And God knows in Florence, they still play this during the Feast of St. John. And if you ever want to see what violent sports can look like, watch watch those soccer games.
Yeah.
Basically, they had a ball that was made of leather, filled with moss, usually, and the idea was to control the ball, and technically there was a goal, but I don't think anyone cared about actually scoring goals.
Mm,
And you could either kick it, punch it with your fist, or hit it with your
yeah.
head. And there was the church kept trying to ban this game in various places in France and Italy and England because people kept dying. Um,
I was just about to say that because we have in our literature, we have that English. This is in England, by the way. I don't have any records of this happening in Dublin with the English who are living in Dublin. But in England, we are aware that the English would sneakily have knives during the football game and they would just take it
I
out and
mean,
stab people during the football game. But that's the
it
English for you.
uh, yeah, I mean it's crazy. It's you take humans like, oh, let's take a game that's fun and let's make it horrible.
Yeah.
Because see, we live in an era when a cut from a piece of vellum could kill us of septicemia in 3 days. So we should make it harder to survive. I don't understand
Yeah.
that attitude, but
But
there it is.
the football game that they had in England seems to have no proper rules or anything because the literature I'm reading from, they didn't even have a set team. The lads were just rocking up and just kicking the ball. It was just join in
Yeah.
whenever, which kind of is how football it works sometimes, where you're playing football and then someone else rocks up. Oh, can I join in? And then someone else joins in. But because this is people are waiting for this to happen, as in someone to come out and throw the ball out, we have large groups suddenly smashing into each other to try to punch each other and to grab the football and kick it to wherever they agreed to kick it into. But
Yeah.
it seems that the rules, compared to today, where at least we have a national support for soccer and football, where we have a
Yeah.
fair idea of rules to follow. Back then, rules didn't even exist. So even a set place to kick the ball into, depending on your local area, may be different. And from my understanding, we have people from all over England that would have gone to the designated place in England to play football. In Ireland, Dublin would have been where you would have seen football and stuff being played. Now, the details of that football very much lacking, because the number one game we would have played, which day it would have been played in, I think it could have been that day. I thought I had it here, which is hurling. I think it is played on.
Isn't that a
Jesus,
form of like field hockey?
that's exactly what it
Yeah.
is. You literally
Yeah.
got it bang on right.
Yeah.
It is field hockey, and there's an argument that hockey that we know today, and there's also an influence in Iceland. Sorry, yeah, Iceland as well has its own form of hurling. I did an entire video on this on hurling because I love talking about hurling and stuff. Terrible at hurling right now. I used to be good as a child, but I'm actually the fifth day. The fifth day of Christmas is when we have hurling going on. So on the fifth day of Christmas in Ireland, we have a game of hurling going on. But could have been played on the third as well. I'm not saying it was bang on, but I'm aware on the fifth day of Christmas in Ireland, we used to play a game of hurling instead of jousting. We do have duels allegedly going on the fifth day of Christmas, but it's mostly hurling and other festive games and stuff. So on the third day of Christmas, maybe around Dublin, people would have played football. And on top of that, what the rule set would have been around Dublin, I'm completely unaware of. Shall we move on to the fourth day of Christmas?
Yes, let's. Uh,
Uh, the
let's
Feast of the
see.
Holy Innocents, when the
Yes.
children took over.
Yes, exactly. So that's the day, that is the day supposedly when Herod, of course, slaughters all the
Mm.
children. Um, that is the day of the innocents, the day when Herod has, all his men go out and slaughter all the newborn children because they're the ones who are supposedly going to take his throne.
Mm.
And of course, as per every prophecy, he misses the one child that is the one who will take over his throne.
Yeah,
But
of
that's
course.
the day. That's the day on which the boy bishops are elected, specifically.
Mm.
So that is Boy Bishop Day. So that is the day
Mm.
when, and that is also the day on which the priests, where the church, the members of the clergy will just let loose. And there's literally one complaint from, I think, San Bernardino, who's complaining that his fellow priests are behaving like fools and dressing like women, and they're
Mm.
eating blood pudding during mass.
Yeah.
And
Oh my
just
God, during
just I know
Mass.
they're eating loudly during
Mm.
while the sermons are
Well, I
being
can say.
preached, right? So that was the day when you had the boy bishops, but also the day when the church just let off steam. And who can everyone needs a day, at least one day a year, when you can just not be whoever you are expected to be, right?
Yeah, we were talking about this earlier. It's the Puck Festival. So to get an idea of what this would have been like in Ireland, you'd have to go to Ireland during the summer in August, when a lot of Irish Americans actually come for this one. The Irish Americans absolutely, and if you plan on coming to Ireland this summer, I wouldn't, especially with the politics and everything that's happening right now, I wouldn't advise really to stay too long in Dublin. But Kerry is the place to be this summer, right? Not only because the atmosphere, if you're trying to get away from the politics and all that garbage and stuff, Kerry is the place to be. As a former tour guide, I can't highlight Kerry enough. But on top of that, if you want to have a good idea of what the medieval festival would have been on the fort, it is the Puck Festival, when the whole world goes upside down.
Mm.
And you would have seen children being the head of the rules. Like, obviously, for the Puck Festival, a goat is the king, you know. So you would have seen this madness on the fort of the fourth day of Christmas and stuff. So it gives us a proper idea of the madness that happens that day. Just going through the comment section
Yeah, we
there,
have we have we
and
have
there's a
some
lot.
sports comments.
Yeah, we can go back into that on the fifth, which is the following day.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else, Rachel, to elaborate on the fourth day? Because I didn't really give you much talking there.
Yeah,
Oh,
no, I
wait.
mean we did earlier talk about the boy bishops. So, and that
Mm.
is that is actually what happens on the Feast of the Innocents, are the boy bishops, and the day that the church, just lets go. And that's the Feast of Fools, right?
Mm.
So that is I don't actually have evidence of a Feast of Fools having happened in anywhere in Italy. It's
Mm.
very hard. It is very hard to find primary source information.
Well,
Uh,
I can definitely say it happened in Ireland. We have so many, even in Ireland.
yeah.
Like, I'm picking Kerry in particular because it's right next to me, because I'm down in the north of Cork in Mallow. So my train route actually goes into Kerry. So I have a lot of connections with Kerry and stuff. But in Ireland, there's a lot of pockets in Ireland that would celebrate this upside down day. So in Ireland, it was definitely had to have been celebrated in Ireland, is the fourth, the day of Holy Innocents, when children would have taken over. If we could go back around now to hurling once again,
Yes.
because on the fifth day is the feasting and merrymaking, which are two traditions which are huge in Ireland. And for the Irish, they would have definitely waited for the fifth day. For both the matchmaking that would have happened in Ireland, but also the hurling that would have gone on. So there was a lot of stuff happening in Ireland on that day. So we could have found a lot of Irish traditions happening on that day. Um, Not sure about Islam. We have one comment in the comment section. Not too. Once again, Orthodox faith and the Islam faith completely ignorant about, so I wouldn't know too much about that. What did girls do? That's quite interesting for the fifth day. I'll answer this one first because on the fifth day, you would have had matchmakers going around, and they would have been, as the lads are trying to run onto the field to play some hurling and other jousting games and stuff. Dueling games and that, and you would have also had lads trying to get into various duels with, the opposite clan and stuff, and wrestling them and stuff. You would have had the matchmaker who would have grabbed one of the lads and pulled him to the side and said, right, you're marrying so and so. And the family would have been there trying to organize and stuff. So on the fifth day, women were trying to organize who they were trying to marry and stuff. And the lads are trying to ignore this and stuff. And they're trying to get involved with the games, the hurling, the dueling. That's what would have, so you would have had all the festive tents and stuff. They would have been all erected on the fifth day, and it would have just been a day of festival between the matchmaking going on and also the big festive games and stuff. Rachel, what's your interpretation on that, and what would have girls done on the fifth?
Yeah, so I mean, the depends on whether you mean girls like little girls or if you mean women, all members of females. So children are obviously they're playing in most of Europe, children kind of live a separate existence from the adults,
Mm,
especially at the levels of the aristocracy, right? They're not they kind of have their own thing. They have their caretaker their nurse, their wet nurses, their nannies, their caretakers, they have their tutors. They only generally incorporate into the main celebrations for very formal, ceremonial aspects. But
mm,
women in general are they're going right along. They are having fun. They are drinking. They're feasting. They're dancing. They're playing games. We have a
mm,
lot of records in general of women dancing together, like
mm,
just
mm.
women and women dancing together, just having a good time.
Yeah.
And that at Christmas was a time when work was supposed to be minimal. So anything women would have traditionally been doing during a day, in the rest of the year, they weren't expected to do much
Mm,
of. Obviously, there was someone still had to cook the food, someone still had to work in the kitchen, right?
mm.
That's kind of you can't have a feast without people preparing it. But,
Yeah.
women throughout, in France and Burgundy, England, they're and Italy, they're having fun. They're enjoying themselves.
Yeah.
And of course, there are those mock marriages conducted by the boy bishops. So,
Yeah.
what are the women doing?
Having fun. Enjoying themselves for a change.
They are. Now that being said, Galeotto Maria Sforza Christmas was his thing, and he actually
Mm,
used it as a chance to summon all of his liege subjects to him. And
mm.
he on Christmas is when they renewed their vows, their
Yeah.
oaths of fealty, and that was
Mm.
kind of true in most feudal places in Europe. Christmas court was a time for your subjects to come and swear fealty to you. But he would also
Oh,
use Christmas as a chance to arrange dynastic marriages.
yeah.
So that is when betrothals would take place in his court for
Mhm.
his family, extended and near. So while there wasn't matchmaking in the conventional sense, there seems to be a lot having to do with marriage that does happen around Christmas in sort of different ways.
That's That's fascinating because we have that happening in the Celtic literature on just before Christmas. So just before Christmas, we have the first time it pops up in the literature is with Mael Shocknall II, who is over king in Ireland when he knocks at the door of Dublin and he looks for his tax and for the person to give homage to him. So that actually happens on Christmas Eve in Ireland, where you
Mm,
would have had the various over-kings coming around Ireland, either the over-king of Ireland himself, Mael Shocknall II, or Brian Boru knocking at the doors of Dublin, looking for his homage and also his tribute, which for Dublin would have been currency, would have been the coins, which we can find through archaeology evidence. And then for the various other places, especially up in the north west of the country, it would have been cattle tribute. Um, so various over kings during the medieval period would have either been looking for their coin tribute from the coins, especially around the ports of Galway, Cork, Wexford, etc. But then up in the northwest of the country, they would have been looking for their cattle tribute. So that mostly happened on Christmas Eve. So you have quickly people trying to, just before Christmas happens, you have people trying to do all the taxes and stuff. That's so famous today when we're trying to. I think it's in America. I'm not quite sure because in Ireland we're very lucky. The government does most of our tax for us. But in America, I think you guys are quite famous for trying to work out your tax and stuff.
Yeah, we are. There's a whole tax industry. Thankfully, it doesn't happen at Christmas. It happens after Christmas. But
Oh, just
yeah,
after Christmas, very good.
I mean, it is silly. Yeah, our system is silly. I'll just put it
Well,
that
it's the
way.
same thing in Japan. Depending on what you work as, you kind of have to do your own tax just before New Year for the businesses, and then for if you're like myself and you're independent, it's just before March that all your taxes and stuff have to be sorted, which is quite fascinating. How it's on for you guys is on the fifth day for the mainlands, that you have the Medici and stuff looking for their homage and stuff. And then in Ireland, it's done just before Christmas Eve. And that even today, tax collecting could be seen as a form of homage to your government.
I mean,
So that's quite interesting
it
stuff.
is. How do you physically show your loyalty? You give money. I mean,
Exactly.
that completely makes sense. In Florence, they had a very, very sophisticated accounting system. I mean, they're the ones who invented accounting, or the
Mm,
Venetians did. But
yeah, they did.
anyway, um, they they took it over, and but they had a very sophisticated income taxes
Mm,
and tax system based on assets as well. And it was called the catasto, and it's actually how we know so much about them because they
mm,
actually had to inventory all of the goods in their households, every
yeah.
single item, so that a value could be given to it, and then they could pay taxes based on that value. Thank God. Thank God.
Mm,
One of the most interesting reads in 15th century in medieval Italian culture are their tax records.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And then obviously Christopher in the comments section, he's going rebel. He's
I
not
want
paying
my
his
coin.
tax. Also, we have another comment as well. Claim the first day of the year is actually late March. Possibly could be April Fool's Day. Oh, we were actually making a slight joke about that comment earlier on.
Yeah,
Was it yourself? Was it you, Rachel, who was making that joke, or someone else? I think someone
about
else made
April
that joke.
Fool's Day? Not me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That Christmas, that Jesus was actually born as a kind of joke. Somebody was making that joke to me. I think it was either
Nice.
last night on the comment section. Yeah, I like that one as well. If you play around with the birthday of Christmas, sorry, I keep saying the birthday of Christmas, the birthday of Jesus, and doing the little countdown of the 12 days that it pops up. If you do it on the 25th of March, I think it goes into the 1st of April or something. Somebody
Right.
was making a joke of, and that New Year should be April Fools. So,
That's pretty funny.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Well,
yeah. I like that one as well. Let's move on to the sixth day because I like the sixth day. The sixth day in Ireland is when you do the pilgrimages to the shrine, right? But this is where it gets a little bit dirty in Ireland, right? So the day before, people would have been matchmaked. So you know at this point who you're going to marry, right? So in Ireland, and this happened all the way up to I think around the 1969, and in some places in Ireland, this happened all the way up to 1998, right? So you know who you're marrying, right? And technically, according to the Bible, I hear that if you get up to no good before your marriage, then it's not really a sin, right? So what people used to do is, right, you're marrying so and so, right? Bring her up into, so they would have gone on pilgrimage, a
right.
little walk up into the mountains together, right? And back in the day, so what happened, I think once the church had taken over in Ireland around the 1960s and stuff, priests were trying to really hammer down on this because, getting up to stuff before marriage, that's not really acceptable. So the priests hated this little thing. But what a lot of the older people would have done would be like, oh, my leg hurts, or my ankle really hurts, I can't get up in the mountain. You two go up into the mountain. And the fathers and stuff would have turned
Great.
around to their sons and stuff, right? Go up there now, and they would have explained how the bees and the honeys and all worked off the previous night. So on the sixth day, when they went on their little pilgrimage up to the mountains and stuff, they were supposed to get with so and so and make sure so and so is happy with you. Um, so this would have been the day where they would have gone for their little pilgrimage, and the two of them would have brought things like alcohol, particular whiskey and stuff with them. Oh, and honey and mead and stuff with them, and would have been sipping away. The two young people, they're teenagers and stuff, playing around with alcohol and stuff, and hopped into a bush and stuff, getting to know each other.
Right.
So you get a fair idea of what they were getting up to while trying to avoid the clergy, because the clergy, even all the way up to the 1960s, this was massively frowned upon, right? Now, this would have happened even more so around February. So, February, when you come to St. Bridget's Day and stuff, this is when this would have been really pushed. But and it's very, very cold around this time in Ireland and
Yeah,
stuff.
no kidding.
So you would have gotten a little bit of this, but more so in February. February is when you've got a lot of this going on. So for the poor cold little couple trying to snuggle up in a bush with a few cans and stuff, oh, would have been a sight to be seen. Like,
Bush.
so on the sixth day in Ireland would have been the day when you would have gone on pilgrimage to one of the shrines. Nana and a few of the older people would have been like, "Oh, my ankle hurts, can't really make it up there." And so you would have had the young people making their little walk up to the shrine and stuff, which, is entertaining in itself. I'm just wondering, Rachel, if anything exciting would have happened in mainland on the sixth day with the pilgrimages and stuff.
Yeah, so the sixth day would be the 30, well, the 31st is the sixth day, right?
Mm,
We up to the
31st.
31st
Yeah, I'm
already,
sure it is.
right? So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah, because it's the
that's
8th day is New Year's.
right. So that's New Year's Eve. So that
Mm,
is the day on which the second, nothing so exciting. And instead of, I guess it's all about burning things and sort of the passion of fire, because instead of a metaphorical fire, they
mm.
light something on fire. So the 31st
Okay.
was the day that the second Yule log was set on, was decorated. They were decorated first and then put
Mm,
in the fireplace and ceremoniously, set on fire so that illuminated
mm,
ignited so that it would burn to celebrate the incoming of the new year. But what's
mm,
curious about that brings me the idea of the new year. Apparently, in Milan for centuries they counted the new year from Christmas Day.
mm,
So in their documents, they're even like 7 days off from the rest of Italy at this time.
mm.
They
See, it's
start
the same
counting the
happens to us. Yeah.
Right, they start counting, but only in Milan, not in Florence, not in
It would
Pisa,
have to
not
be
in
Milan,
Siena,
wouldn't
just
it?
just Milan. And then in the
Yeah.
mid 15th century, they change it to align with the rest of the Italies.
Mm,
Um, so, but no matter what, on the 31st in Tuscany, that's the day on which one would have set the second Yule log on fire.
mm,
And
mm,
that would have come with a ceremony, and then there would have been a feast, and there would have been music and dancing. And one Christmas, Galeazzo Maria Sforza had to borrow musicians from
mm.
another court because he had put all of his in jail. I
I don't. Do I want to know what happened there? Like,
I don't know why they were all in jail. I haven't been able to find the document committing them
mm,
to prison, but apparently in his massive court of, he had a full 30 something musicians kind of on his records at any one time. And apparently all of them he had put in jail, so we had to borrow musicians for his Christmas festivities.
what happened that day? Like, we have
I
pilgrimages and stuff, and maybe something happened on the fifth day with the jousting, the tournaments and stuff. I don't know.
yeah, I don't know when they got put in prison, but by the time Christmas came around, he needed some outside assistance. So apparently, I think Florence sent him a
Oh,
bunch
of
of
course, Florence would.
musicians.
I bet you the Medici there with the big smile on their head, like.
You know it. You know it.
Oh, stop.
Florence sent them musicians.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The comment section's really lighting up right now. Untalented magicians when drunk. Yeah, they
Yeah.
probably were. I want to make a pilgrimage to Ireland. My 6'8" grandmother was from Cork. Oh, like myself. Such a
Uh,
Transmania 200 years ago for
transported,
stealing. Oh,
transported
transported
she was.
200 years ago for stealing tree. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're not the only one. I have rakes of people from Cork that got the old boot to Australia. I'm surprised Wayne isn't in the comment section. I'd love to know Wayne's story there as well. Yeah, that would have been around the what was it, the 19th century, isn't it, when they were sending people for, because it's the same thing in England as well,
Yeah,
and
so
throughout
they
the
they
whole
they
British Empire.
the thing is Georgia used to be the penal colony,
Mm.
and then the little thing called the American War for Independence happened, and we
Oh
broke away, and
yeah.
the United Kingdom literally had to find a new penal colony.
Yeah.
So so everyone thought, wow, Australia, that's a really scary, dangerous place. We should send people there as punishment in lieu of the death sentence. So
Mm. You see what happened in Ireland then in 1803. The Irish Parliament, finally, the British have cracked Ireland. Finally, Ireland is put under British rule. Was 1803, which was almost, I think it's 400 years, because in 1603, the earls, the nobles of Ireland, are finally given the boot of the country. And you would think Ireland would be taken over, and it's not. The English have to spend more resources, more years trying to finally crack the Irish in. And then finally in 1803, Ireland is finally under British rule. And so, because you have rebellions kicking off left, right, and centre, the British are constantly rounding them up, because this is also after the period of the Williamite Jacobite Wars as well. So that's
mm,
all crushed. And finally, what was it? Lord Edward Fitzgerald, he's also killed. Robert Emmet is killed. He was supposed to be hung, drawn, and quartered, but he ends up being hanged. Wolfe Tone gets what was it, a pen, and puts it into his neck. All the leaders are finally dead. The British have taken over, and now they have pockets of little rebellions kicking off. So they're a constant solution to all of this. So you could have like broken the smallest little crime, and this is the sad story: is you have little kids
yeah,
breaking little crimes and are rounded
yeah,
up with the rebels who are there to be the likes of hung, drawn, and quarters and stuff, and they're just rounded up and they're sent off to Australia. So you have people who are the most radical of these terrorist groups, or freedom fighters from my perspective, all the way to
yeah,
little tiny boys trying to feed themselves during all this madness, rounded up and just sent off to Australia, and they don't care what their crime is.
yeah.
In some, and what's depressing is allegedly these are the lucky ones. There was a record of one little poor boy in Cork prison, and he's put into a frozen cold room all by himself, and it's a stone room, hard as stone, and he's just left there with a little rug, and most nights completely frozen. So most of this stuff is absolutely depressing to read in the 19th century, when the British are constantly trying to crush all this stuff. Very depressing stuff. We'll
Well,
have to move
crime
back to
and
Christmas, because I'm
yeah,
getting
because
into
crime
too
and
depressed.
punishment before the modern era is depressing as hell and
Oh,
terrifying. I
hallelujah.
mean,
Yeah.
you're starving, you steal a piece of bread, you get hanged. Wow.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah. We'll have to get back to Christmas now, because it's getting a bit
Yes.
too
Christmas.
depressing.
Yeah. Back to
Lord
something more.
Edward Fitzgerald. Oh, who's V? Descended from V. I'm not sure who V is. Oh, oops, Charles II.
All right.
Yeah. They were all of all of Europe, all of the nobles and stuff were all married into each other and stuff. Especially because the Irish lords would have spent a lot of time in the London court, because it was right next to them, and they would have also, as we were saying earlier, would have spent a little bit of time in the courts in Italy and stuff, and they would have also hung out in the French and Spanish courts as well. So you do have Irish nobles around the 19th century. You would have definitely had them in both the London court and in the Spanish court. I'm not too by the time I go up to the 19th century, I'm not sure about the how Italy was even formed at that stage and stuff.
Well,
So I'm very ignorant
Italy,
about Italy in
yeah,
the
Italy was a mess in the 19th century, and that's kind of the
yeah
period when it starts to get reunified. Well, Napoleon comes in and breaks up the Holy Roman Empire, right? And
yeah
he basically like takes over Italy and,
mm,
assigns various parts of it to his family members.
yeah
And then that falls through, and that leaves this vacuum of
mm,
power where they're trying to go back to the way things were before, but they can't. And so that opens the door for Garibaldi to come in and reunify Italy. But
mm,
it's reunified at the point of a sword, because actually half of Italy was the Papal States at that
mm,
point. And so, it's the 19th century in Italy is a period of revolution and rebellion and
yeah
upheaval. And it's a big mess. It's not,
yeah
and it's poor. It's completely impoverished at that
yeah.
point.
Same in Ireland. Yeah.
Right, and that's why
Uh,
suddenly all these rich English people are going on the grand tour, because Italy is cheap destination for them.
Ooh, yeah,
Yeah.
that's quite interesting and stuff. God, we could talk all day about that
Yeah, I
because
know.
my
Christmas.
brain was even rumbling about the Sicilians and all the Irish that end up in New York and stuff. And then you have the movie The Gangs of New York and all
Oh
that stuff.
God,
God, we
that
could talk all day about that stuff.
yeah, that's brutal stuff.
And I'm allegedly ignorant to all that stuff, and even my brain is lighting up. Yeah, very very interesting time. But we have to get back to the 12 days of
Christmas.
Christmas. Yeah,
Christmas.
yeah, yeah. Because we're now on the seventh day, the
Christmas.
gift giving. So in Ireland, the day before, you would hopefully, you now have two couples who can't take their hands off each other allegedly, or you have the complete opposite where you have a girl in one side of the room trying to avoid this guy, and this guy is like looking at his father going, I don't know what to do. And the father is like, what did you do? What did you do the night before? So you have two kinds of couples around the court today: the couples that can't take their hands off each other, and one girl trying to hide from the boy and spending the whole day trying to hide from this boy. Depending which way it goes, the seventh day is the day for gift giving. The families would have given gifts to each other and stuff, and it was also it says singing in the orchards. I'm not quite sure what that is. I have that in my notes. So it would have been the day for to check on the. I'm not quite sure because some of my notes are quite funny. But anyway, regardless, it would have been definitely a day of gift giving in Ireland. Rachel, what's your
So
notes
so
for the
it's
seventh day?
funny. Gift giving doesn't happen um, in most of mainland Europe until the Feast of the Epiphany, because
Mm,
it's supposed to, be a recollection of the Magi giving the gifts to Jesus.
mm,
And then, of course, what most people don't know is that afterwards, his parents gave all of those, they donated all of those things to the poor.
mm,
So, it's kind of it's not until the Feast of the Epiphany when gift giving actually officially happens,
mm,
except that depending on the court you're in, there might be some kind of like preparatory gift giving happening,
mm, mm,
um,
mm,
depending, especially because, you've got these at the upper end level of society, you have these ambassadors who are
mm,
coming to Milan, they're coming to Florence, they're going to the court in Burgundy, they're going to, the Valois court in Paris, and
mm,
even Edward. Edward the Fourth at this point, well, Edward the Fourth had a mobile Christmas court. He celebrated Christmas at like a different castle every year. Um, and so did the Dukes of Burgundy. But
Which
interestingly,
Edward the Fourth is that? Sorry.
of England, sorry,
Oh,
Edward the
England.
Fourth of
Okay.
England, Edward of York. Yeah, he
Yeah,
uh,
yeah, yeah.
he celebrated, um, you know, basically at like a different castle every year. He really tried to get around, and in
Yeah,
every
yeah.
sense of that word,
Yeah,
of
he
that
was trying to
expression.
fix up relations as well.
Right.
After all the civil fighting, and then you had the fighting in France as well, which he's trying to tidy up. Because from what I remember, from the Wars of the Roses, is especially in Ireland and stuff, is that Edward is trying to calm down everything that's happened in Ireland. So he's sending out gifts and stuff, as we were saying there, so I think because England had caused so many problems when the Plantagenets were at their peak, now that the Yorkists are in, they're trying to quell everything down after the Hundred Years' War because I think they can I say this? They messed the banking system up in Florence, didn't they, during the Hundred Years' War? Because there's even it was Edward III had taken out a large sum out of Florence from my what I remember, and it had messed up a lot of families were annoyed about this. And even like going into the Battle of Bosworth, there were actually Italian families supporting Tudors because they wanted to get their money back, which the Tudors do eventually pay back, from my understanding. So, from what I remember, yeah, um, the English are definitely sending out gifts and stuff to try to calm everything down, like, and people looking for their money on that after the Hundred Years' War.
Right. Yeah. The
Mm.
Medici are actually they make the Hundred Years' War is good for them.
Oh,
that's
nice.
that's
Not
how
only
they
for getting
that's
rid of rivals.
yeah, that is yeah, it is they make their wealth supporting the various royal houses in not just the Hundred Years' War, and in the War of the Roses is when the cousins were, right? So it's a good time for them. It doesn't break them at all. There are other banks that do go bankrupt, but not them. They're
Right.
doing well.
Mm,
Um,
mm, mm,
they're
mm.
just fine, and it's their banking system that allows commerce in Europe to really flourish, because most people
mm,
don't understand the idea of a letter of credit is a medieval invention. And the idea was
mm,
that actually came about during the Crusades, but the Italians really took off with it. You know, you deposit a sum of money in Florence, you get a
mm.
letter of credit, and then you can take that letter with you to Bruges when you go to
Mm.
Bruges. Go to the
Yeah,
Medici bank there and pull out that exact sum of money without
yeah, yeah.
without having the danger of transporting that sum of money with you across, you know, criminal riddled roads between Florence and Bruges. So, you know,
Mm.
they that system allowed commerce to really kick off. You could maybe even attribute the the growth of modern Europe to the Italian banking system, maybe even.
Yeah, you could. I have a video actually coming out in the next few hours which talks about Alice Kettler. She was this was a very famous case in Europe, and it was in Kilkenny, which is a video I'm covering tonight. And this is what actually gets her in trouble, is the fact that she becomes so financially secure because she actually got her father had gotten the ideas that the Knights Templars had brought into Ireland of, if you were leaving Kilkenny, because it was not safe outside of the walls of Kilkenny because you could
Right.
be attacked and stuff, you could leave your money with Alice Kettler's father. And then when he died, she took over the business and stuff of giving money to her, and she'd keep it in her, was it her goldsmith or one of her smiths anyway, and she would give you a piece of paper, and then you could go off to do your own business and stuff, and you wouldn't have to worry about your money would go missing. Problem is she made too much money out of this. So when you had, what's really funny, you need to look up the Ellis Kettler trial, is the fact that the same bishop that trialed and then executed the Knights Templars, it's the same guy who's actually running the trial. So you could have an entire. I haven't come across any conspiracies and stuff. I'm actually surprised, but you could have an entire banking conspiracy about Ellis Kettler, the same bishop that burned the Knights Templars, and the Knights Templars themselves. So that's quite interesting, and I slightly touch on it tonight with my video on medieval Kilkenny. So definitely check that out, guys. Um, so we've just finished. Oh, we're moving on to the eighth day, which is New Year's Day. Finally, it's New Year's Day, where depending on where you are in Ireland, it could be a day full of prayers, or if you're with the McCarthy's and the O'Briens and stuff, it's another day of festivals, and we're having banquets and everything that day. So depending on where you are in Ireland, you're probably up in the mountains of Ulster, well, the hills of Ulster, praying in the freezing cold, or you could be over in Bramati Castle having yourself a nice old chicken bone and stuff. New Year's Day in medieval Europe. What's
Yeah,
going on, Rachel?
so it's, you know, that's a major feast day. That is the Feast of the Virgin. Um,
Mm,
one of Mary's major feast days. That's a high church day.
mm,
So I stumbled into Aachen Cathedral on this particular during this high mass, and I
mm.
stumbled in just in time for the Litany of the Saints, which
Wow.
is a long process, by the way, but involves
Mm,
lots of incense. My point is that was definitely a day where everyone went and attended mass. And
mm,
then after mass, it was, you know, back to revelry, because you only have 12 days to let steam off for, you know,
mm.
until May, basically.
Yeah.
So, well, until that's not true. You have Carnivale, so that
Mm,
comes up. That's coming down the pipeline. But yeah, so
mm,
it's every, you know, people go to mass. It's a long mass. It's a high mass, and then it's back to gaming. It's back to listening to music and singing. It's
mm,
back to you know, the various sorts of revelry, you know. But while this is all happening in Florence and in various parts of Italy, preparations are underway for these cavalcades, the processions of the Magi, because everyone there were different co-fraternities um, all over Europe that, you know,
mm,
celebrated, that focused on producing a production of
mm,
plays there, because it wasn't just the cavalcade. There were also the mystery plays,
mm,
which sort of told the way we have a in America, we have Christmas pageants now
mm,
at Christmas time, like usually on midnight mass. Actually, that's a holdover from the medieval practice of the mystery cycle plays. The
mm.
York cycle plays have survived from the 14th century. I actually got
Oh,
to
right.
perform in one. um,
Yeah.
in one of my living history events. And these mystery plays were a way to visualize the story of Jesus's, birth for the average person who definitely couldn't read. Not that
Mm.
anyone really had books in the 14th or 15th century of any quantity.
Yeah.
They were real collector's items. So these plays depicted but they didn't depict usually they didn't depict the upper end, the upper side. It didn't depict, Jesus's birth from the perspective of the angels. They
Mm.
depicted Jesus's birth from the perspective of the shepherds.
Mm.
So, they're a little body or a lot body. Um,
Mm.
and they're filled with sort of silly humor, and there's slapstick stuff happening as well, but that's kind of juxtaposed next to the very real story of Jesus's, serious story of Jesus's birth. So,
Mm.
you would have had all throughout this period in various parts of Europe, there would have been performances of these mystery plays because people had to come in from in many cases, outside of the city for mass, right? They
Mm.
had to get into the city from their country estates if they were farmers. Estates is a really strong word. From their farms out in the
Mm.
countryside. They had to make that journey, and they don't have horses usually, so they have to walk, or it's a mule, an ox-drawn cart, or something like that. So instead of going back and forth between masses, because there would be two or three a day, they would just stay in the city for the day, and that's when these performances were actually staged by these co-fraternities to kind of keep
Mm.
people entertained. It was kind of a way to preserve the city, probably, from drunken violence, now that
Yeah.
I think about it.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
because I was just thinking the same thing as well. Because as we move into the next day, the ninth day, there's a lot of people hung over, like they're slowly but surely waking up, and it's kind of a recycle of what was happening earlier with the 12 days. Is how we have if you're looking from the Anglo-Irish point of view, from the southeast of the country and stuff, where you would have had feasts and stuff the first day, and then the following day you would have had, the giving away of food and stuff. The leftovers would have been given to the people who were not so well off, living out in the country areas and stuff, the peasants. You see the same thing happening on the ninth day in Ireland as well, where on New Year's you would have had the festival and the banquets, depending on where you are in Ireland. But then the following day, if you were in the likes of Blarney Castle or Bernatty Castle, you've gone back into the castle to pick up the lords and ladies would have gotten their servants to round up the food and then given
Right.
it to the peasants and stuff, or as they're cheekily calling in Galway, the dirty natives.
The
Um,
dirty natives.
yeah. um, there's an entire, it's so funny because I was just talking to my wife yesterday and she's trying to study wall culture in Japan. Because in Japan, in China, there's a wall and they're trying to keep the difference between the peasants and the people inside the wall and the civilized in the wall. And it's so funny when my wife was telling me this because we kind of have the same thing
Mm.
going on in Ireland as well, where you have people inside of the wall and people outside of the wall, which the peasants, the dirty savages and stuff. And so the people outside of the wall would have came in on the ninth day. Food would have been gathered for them and would have been given to them as charity and stuff. And then the beggars would have had their charity food and stuff. But it's weird because in Japan they don't have this wall society. They do have a level of us and them, but
Right.
it's not so because there's no real wall. Like walls in Japan are more for decorative use. They're still trying to understand how they would have known the differences between us and them because it
Mm.
gives a fair idea of the literature and stuff, but it's much more complicated to Japan. So my main point being is that you would have had the peasantry who would have came into the walls and stuff of the settlement and would have collected their food on the ninth day, and a kind of recycle of this. The rich and the powerful, they have these big glorious festivals one day, and then the following day the leftovers gets gathered and given to as a kind of, it also kind of shows off their wealth once again. Look, we have so much leftovers that we're able to just keep the poorest of
Yeah.
the poor fed for the whole year. That's how powerful and rich we are. It is proper show off. Is it the same in Europe on the ninth day?
So, not necessarily on the ninth day, but in England, for example, actually, the lords weren't the lord of the manor wasn't just expected to give away scraps. They would actually host feasts
mm,
entire feast for their tenants and their peasants. It was
mm,
sort of like the agreed upon social contract. And it's one
mm,
of the
mm,
things that definitely died once you stopped having, tenants in England. It's a practice that continued until the 18th century, I think.
mm,
Um, and in France, it's similar. The lord of the you're the lord for whom you work as a serf, as a
mm,
peasant, whether you're a tenant or a serf, they would actually stage multiple feasts for you throughout the Christmas holidays. The only thing
mm,
you had to bring, and this is weird, well, one is weird, one is not. You had to
mm,
bring fuel for the fire, so you had to
mm, mm,
bring wood or cow patties, and of course you had to bring your own tableware, but that was standard practice for most.
mm,
You had to bring your own knife, your spoon, and your trencher, right? That
mm,
was
mm,
pretty standard practice. So, instead of just the scraps, they were actually hosting entire feasts,
mm,
um,
mm.
for the not for the poor, for their peasants. The
Yeah.
scraps went to the poor. That was absolutely 100%. In fact, there's a lot of you can actually, if you look for them in illuminations and frescoes, and even not tapestries, illuminations and frescoes, you'll
Mm,
actually see the poor like congregating outside of a door, and that door is where they're waiting for the scraps from a feast, basically, to be
mm, mm.
distributed. Yeah,
Trying
so
to.
that's
No, I'm just typing in quickly what day we are on because we're coming
oh
up to. I think we're on today. We are on because we're moving on to the next day, and I'm sure today are we on the 11th day or are we
yeah,
on
I
the?
think
No, we're on the 11th day, aren't we?
we're on the 11th day. Yep.
Okay, today. You think
Which
I
is
should know this?
technically
Maybe
12th
this.
night, actually.
Sorry.
The 11th day is actually technically 12th night,
Oh, right, 12 nights of it.
right?
Yeah, yeah. Here I have on my notes. I just have day one, day two, day three, day
Right, yeah.
four.
It's a little
Um,
confusing because 12th day is the Feast of the Epiphany, 12th night is the night before the 12th day. It's
mm, 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 mm.
yeah.
Yeah, once again, the same problems depending on your interpretation of where you are and stuff, because you also have the pagans, and then the whole thing of were there still pagans hiding out in the mountains and stuff who were still
Right.
celebrating the sun god and stuff. So depending on where you are, you have different interpretations on how this celebration would have gone. As we move on to the 10th day, which would have been for Ireland, once again, it would have been things would have been calming down again. You would have had prayers. You would have had a few games, and you would have had a dance night as well. So people would have organized for us in Ireland. Obviously, you would have had the evolution of the Irish dancing. Obviously, today we are famous for the river dance. But river
Yeah.
dance and Irish dancing, it starts to evolve from a mixture of Gaelic dancing mixed with Norman dance. When the Normans come in, that's where we start to see these dancers coming into the castles and stuff and dancing for the lords and ladies of the castle in the, for example, Bunratty Castle, Blarney, sorry, yeah, Bunratty Castle, Blarney Castle, etc., where the lords and ladies would have expected dancers to come in, professional dancers to come in and dance for them and entertain them. And that's where we would have seen the evolution and development of river dance that we know today. Um, What's the story with Europe at this point? What's happening on the 10th day? Is it just nice, relaxing? It's more of a prayer day, or are they
Oh,
going
no, it's
completely
it's
wild?
it's continued revelry. I mean, there don't seem to be relaxing days in mainland Europe. And there don't really seem to be relaxing days in England either. It's one of the reasons that Christmas got banned by
Oh,
the
yeah,
by the
well, you know,
Puritans,
yeah.
because
Mm,
because it was so raucous of a party. I mean, you've got every day it's kind of more or less there doesn't seem to be you do this on this day and this on that day, with the exception of the Boy Bishop being the Feast of the Innocents,
mm,
the Yule logs, and then of course the 12th night is the big blowout. That's it. That's the cap off. That's the final thing. And there's feasting and there's dancing. Um,
mm,
Supposedly Shakespeare wrote his play Twelfth Night to be performed on Twelfth Night for the
mm,
Queen, actually.
yeah.
Um, and he actually addresses the topic of topsy turvy because you have a cross dressing woman
Mm,
as the lead role, right? Um,
mm.
so this was the day on which the Lord of Misrule was appointed.
Oh,
And it
yeah.
was 12th night. The Lord of
Which is,
Misrule was 12th night. And
yeah, yeah.
that this was chosen. I have not been able to find out if this was practiced in Italy. It was definitely practiced in France. It was called Prince des Sceaux, which is like the Prince of Sots.
Mm. Oh
um,
yeah.
and it was definitely practiced in England. And it was your Prince des Sceaux was chosen. Modernly, later on it got the name King of the Bean
Mm,
because you would make a 12th night cake. And a 12th night cake is not, it's not a, we don't, what we call a cake is not what was a cake before the 18th century because
mm,
modern chemical leavening allows us to create these light, fluffy cakes. No, no, no. A medieval cake was more like an enriched yeast bread.
mm,
So it was more like challah, probably. And it had dried fruits in it because it was very expensive and very exotic at that point.
mm,
Currants and dates and figs and raisins and sometimes candied peels, like candied lemon peel, candied citrus peel.
mm,
And then somewhere baked into that would be a bean.
mm,
And the loaf was round. It was a round loaf, round bread. They didn't have bread molds or anything like that.
mm,
So
mm, mm.
um, the bread was torn up and distributed amongst all the revelers, and whoever had the bean became the Lord of Misrule. Now, I
Yeah,
have no evidence of ladies of Misrule. I have not found but I can't imagine that they only distributed the 12th night cake to the men. So
yeah.
presumably there could have been a lady of Misrule, and in fact was. It hasn't made it in any of the historical records that I've
It's
found.
just women's history is just not important. It should just be in the
It
kitchen.
isn't. I know. I know. I get that.
What are
I
you doing
totally
outside the kitchen?
understand. We we don't really exist. We're just a figment of men's imaginations.
Yeah, like Africa, just it just doesn't exist. I don't know what
It
you're
doesn't
talking about.
exist. No civilizations there at all. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Right. Moving on. Okay, so this is quite interesting how we're starting in Ireland. It's not that we're finished up the festival or anything, but we're starting to have a relaxing as we go from the 10th day. But then on the 11th day, things start to pick up again. We're starting to pick up a day, and we're on the 11th day today, which is the fourth, and we're starting to pick up again. And at this point, we're organizing for the main festival that's happening on the 12th, the final day on 12th. So on the 11th day, people are now singing, they're playing games, bonfires are now being lit. Previous night on the 10th day, we were organizing for this, but we were still having dances. Obviously, we would have had the Céilís and stuff inside of the castles and various other places. But tonight, we're proper. The alcohol is coming out, people are singing, people are dancing, but people are getting really revved up because tomorrow is the main day. So you in Ireland, I've been to a few festivals like this before where the main festival is the night before, and you would have had people around 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock going, I'll get ready for the main festival tomorrow, and they would have ducked away. And then you would have had the odd little group where they're like, they don't care, they're getting, they're
They're
enjoying the
starting
alcohol
early.
and they're enjoying it. So you have
Yeah.
two groups now tonight. Tonight on the 11th, we have one group who are slowly but surely doing what they call an Irish goodbye, where they don't tell anybody because they don't want to be pulled in by the main group. And they're slowly but surely ducking away and hiding away and doing the old Irish goodbye that we're so famous
Irish
for.
goodbye.
And then you have the main group. They don't care about tomorrow. It's all good times for them, and they're knocking back all the alcohol. It's fun and games for them, and the bonfires are being lit. So you could just imagine throughout all of these towns in Bunratty, Blarney, and Cork and stuff, where you would have these little pockets throughout the whole settlement of groups of people chatting away, people ducking and diving to get home, to get to sleep, and to relax for the tomorrow. And then you would have had groups that would have been proper into it,
Mm.
like that's the kind of day you could imagine on the 11th day in Europe. What do you think of the literature? What's your interpretation, Rachel?
Right. So bonfires that sounds so dangerous in a medieval European
This is
city.
what's crazy is that you did
That's
actually have settlements that would have gone up on fire. So it's not like I can turn around and
this
say,
is
oh, well, that didn't happen in Ireland. It did. They
that's
had
just
to
so
get
crazy.
people in to watch the fires. They would have been there while everybody's having fun. You would have had that guy with the lantern wandering around going, hey, what are you up to? And seeing who's getting a bit too dangerous with their bonfire. And knowing that some people are enjoying themselves a little bit too much, they would have definitely been roaring and screaming from that local fire warden, trying to see if anybody's trying to set fire. And that's if they were set people set around the place, and sometimes they weren't, and places were going up in fire. So I can't say that didn't happen. No, we have records of that happening through all of Europe, of fires going off and stuff. Yeah, Rachel.
I can't. So, across most of continental Europe, cities were extremely densely packed.
Mm,
Um, the urban centers were pretty tight, and especially in Tuscany in northern Italy, the streets are super narrow. Everyone is it's chock-a-block buildings. There's almost no place you can build a bonfire.
mm, mm,
The only place might be in, the main town square, but I have, huh, I have not read any records about bonfires, but in Rome, in the
mm,
Middle Ages, there was a practice whereby the Pope, because back then there was no papal states. The Pope was the Rome one. He was the ruler of Rome. I mean, there was no division between Italy and the papal states. The papal states were a thing. So the Pope on Christmas Day actually would make a progress around the city, going from church to church, and they would hang uh, linen banners, like linen streamers, from the entrances of the church, and he would set them on fire as he
mm,
entered the church, and the streamers would burn all the way up.
mm,
And I don't know how they didn't also set the church then on fire, but he was actually it was this official thing where the Pope would literally was given a giant one of those giant candle holders that you see used in the mass when they process down the aisle of the church, and it
mm,
had a lit candle on top, and he would be handed it to him by a cantor, and he would set these streamers on fire.
mm, mm, mm.
So, not bonfires, but apparently in Rome they still like to set things on fire. So they went with
They kind of
fabric.
remind me of like early fireworks, the kind of early firework displays and stuff, and how they have their little burners and stuff. That's what it kind of reminds me of.
Right, but it's their streamers are attached to the columns at the entrances of these churches. The one they specifically talked about was Santa Maria Maggiore, which is would have been kind of outside of town back then, but is now very close to Termini train station. And
Mm.
it's a Byzantine church, so it's one of the few places you can go left in the world where you can go and see Byzantine mosaics because it's still
Wow.
intact, right?
Mm,
That's how old this church is, and they're
mm,
hanging linen streamers from the front of the entrance and setting them on fire. So that's not necessarily on any particular. On the day when the Pope made on Christmas, because it could happen on any day when he would make his progress through the entire city.
mm, 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 mm.
And
Uh,
meanwhile, in Florence, they're like, no, we're not setting anything on fire because if something goes on fire, it's disastrous. For Florence, when one building catches on fire, the entire neighborhood is gone. And financially, that's a disaster for the city. So
Yeah,
they avoid
Dublin
that.
has the same problem. In fact, right, when you have sieges going on in Dublin, they'll find because people who are sieging Dublin are somewhat aware. Even the Normans, when they're doing an invasion, they're somewhat aware that Dublin is very touchy feeling about fires. So when the Normans are sieging Dublin, and various other enemies of Dublin are sieging Dublin, they'll actually look for a slight house that's slightly sticking up a bit too much, and they'll try to actually build around so they can set fire to those buildings. And once that building's on fire, that's it. Everybody
That's
knows
it.
the
It's
game is up.
it's
Dublin
done.
is on fire. Dublin is very touchy feely when it comes down to fire safety and stuff. So I can definitely say, just like Florence, Dublin has the same thing as well, where people would have been touchy feely about bonfires and stuff compared to the likes of Bunratty and Blarney and stuff, where they have the space available. And also, you would have had more kind of, especially if you're dealing with the northwest of the country and stuff, where they have much more big open areas to be able to build these bonfires, where they didn't have to worry about big fires like they did in Dublin. So Dublin,
Right.
100% would have had the same fear of catching fire, and that's it. The jig is up. We're on fire. Like, and even people who are coming to siege are fully aware of this. And it's a good point, actually. I never thought about this. That people who were sieging Dublin may have come to Dublin previously for a festival, noticed that people were very touchy feely about bonfires, and went, "Okay, I'm taking a note about this." Like, so yeah, I never even thought about that before. That's so fascinating and interesting. As we enter into the 12th day, this is it. It's the 12th day of Christmas. You have the big Magi,
Blowout.
Magi. Yeah,
Yeah.
this is it. We have the big festival. The play is on because the previous day we've all been organizing the play of the Three Kings coming in. In Ireland, when I was growing up, we would have had this play before the play of the Magi. I keep butchering. I can't. My tongue can't get around it right now. Um, the play anyway of the Three Kings coming in to see Mary. So the birth of Jesus, and then the Three Kings coming in to see Mary. Um, that play, when I was growing up, was actually done just before Christmas. Back in the
Interesting.
medieval period, that would have been done on the 12th day of Christmas.
Yes.
And this is the big festival that would have happened. And so for the last 2 days, on the 10th day of Christmas and the 11th day of Christmas, knowing how we normally work, this would have been like, oh, geez, try to get all the stuff in. We'll try to pack it up. Although they were supposed to spend the 12 days preparing for this, I could imagine people as quick as trying to organize this, even on the morning of the 12th day, quickly running around trying to get that organized. Then you've got the other guys who are waking up as well, hungover from the night before, from enjoying themselves a bit too much. Then you have the old couples who are, what's it called, still being all touchy feeling with themselves. They're wandering around. And then you've got that one poor girl trying to avoid that creepy guy who's following around the place because the families want them to marry and stuff. So, like, you can just imagine, oh, Rachel's just disappeared. Oh, she's back again.
Oh, I don't.
You
I have no idea what happened.
Oh, no big deal. Yeah, you could just imagine the morning on the 12th being so exciting. All these characters just walking around the place and stuff. Rachel, what's your interpretation on the morning of the 12th?
Yeah. So Italians do ceremony like no one else. I mean,
Mm,
they and especially in the 15th century specifically, um, there would have been no one would have been allowed to be hungover
mm,
on the morning of the Feast of the Epiphany. That would have been not done, and
mm,
would have had dire consequences for anyone who contributed to a less than stellarly successful procession of the Magi.
mm, mm,
So I guarantee you that anything that happened the night before was done in such a way that they could easily come out of it in the morning because the procession of the Magi was the thing. It was
mm,
the thing that all of Florence built up to and all over Italy, the processions of the
mm,
Magi. That was it. And so, in the morning, it's everyone is probably up early. They go to mass. And then there are this procession that literally goes through the city, and various places in the city have been set up to be stations along the Magi's route,
mm,
right?
mm,
So they actually have apparently the baptistry, which sits across the square from Santa Maria del Fiore, the cathedral, the Duomo, as people call it. Um,
mm,
that
mm.
was Herod's palace, apparently. That was used to
Yeah.
represent Herod's palace. And it would be, these various confraternities with their, 50 to 100 people in each cavalcade would just sort of make their way around the city,
Mm,
depicting their version of the three magi. And of course, it was all about who has the bigger, best white picket fence, as we say in the US, right? So
mm,
it
mm,
was who has the best clothing, who has the best horses, who has the most people, who has the best music, because of course there's also musicians accompanying them. They have parade floats, they've got singers, right? So it would have been a hell of a spectacle.
yeah.
And
I can't, what's actually funny is that because I grew up in the north of Cork and stuff as well, I could imagine those same families, especially since the Fitzgeralds would have gone off to Florence. They definitely would have been rocking up in Kerry that next day, trying to show off all this stuff, getting ideas from Florence, as they would say. Oh, the Fitzgeralds, they would have had notions. So they would have definitely showed off, and I
notions.
could just, yeah, notions. It's meant to be, sometimes it could be derogative and sometimes it's just funny because it's meant to be like, oh, you don't want to get some notions now, but the Fitzgeralds always had notions. Like there's so many literature of them, just as we were joking about the other day and stuff, of them running around in silk up in the muddy mountains of Kerry and stuff in that fine what was it, Florentine silk and stuff. So you can imagine the locals looking at the Fitzgeralds thinking, well, they have notions anyway. Um, and they weren't the only ones because the O'Briens and the McCarthy's were doing the same things as well with these festivals of rocking up with their finest wool and silk and stuff, trying to really show off. And so you can imagine them spending that morning preparing, and then finally, as the evening dips in and we're starting to get these plays up and running and stuff, that you can imagine the nobles just in the background looking at everyone smug. Well, some people have a few sore heads and stuff, like, so the 12th day would have definitely been exciting. Have you seen the play for the what was it? I cannot pronounce it right now. My tongue keeps flipping around. But the three wise men coming in to see Jesus. You've seen that play? Have you?
You mean the Christmas pageant?
Yes, that's the one.
Yeah, yeah, yep. And I lived in Germany for a long time, and they have this practice there, and I didn't have time to go and see if it was actually medieval, but it probably is, where three children dress up as the Magi and they go with the
Yeah.
priest from house to house and they bless the house
Wow. We
in
don't do
each
that in
town.
Ireland. We have the three kids, all right, and they have the three gifts. But instead of giving, you see, this is why I get so confused, because instead of giving the three gifts that they're supposed to give, the kids will come up with whatever. Like one kid will give a school book, the other kid will give a hurley stick, and the third kid will give the cake that grandmother would have made and stuff. So in Ireland, we literally just have our own interpretation, and that's what we had in Mallow. So I never mind other places in Ireland which would have had its own interpretation of what's going on and stuff. So it's very interesting that although here I've got a list and it's ba 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 ba, that's not the case. Like even there's even parts of Europe that may have not even celebrated the 12th day with the play and stuff. But we are aware that the likes of where I'm living and stuff, although we do this, the Christmas pageant now,
Right.
it's before Christmas with the Christmas pageant. On the 12th day, that's when they would have had plays to celebrate the coming of the three wise men into see Jesus and stuff. Depending on where you live and going off of their interpretation of reality and what would have happened around them and stuff. So that
Right.
was quite exciting and stuff. Rachel, is there anything else you want to elaborate on?
I think I I think we have to remember, like you say, that traditions can be very local,
Yeah,
and that the Middle Ages. I like to say this in almost every video I make. The Middle Ages was not a monolith.
yeah.
So, what was happening in Italy in the 1450s might not be what was happening in Italy in the 1350s. What's happening in Burgundy in 1420 is not what's happening in 1470 necessarily.
Mm,
So,
mm,
in these sort of broad, when we do a live stream like this, everyone, please keep in mind that your mileage will vary when you start getting down into the details of dates and specific places. But,
mm,
I think it's fascinating to see just how much things have changed.
mm.
Christmas, we have Christmas trees now, and that's not even a practice in the Middle Ages.
Not in
Invented
Ireland.
apparently in Tallinn was the first time a Christmas tree was put up,
Mm,
from
mm.
what I can tell, in
Yeah,
1444.
yeah.
And
Because we don't get a Christmas tree in Ireland because everyone assumes that we had Christmas trees in Ireland in the medieval period, but we actually
no,
don't get it until about the 1800s or so. And
it's
even
the
on
the
top of that, because of
Hanoverians brought them.
Mm,
The Hanoverians brought them
yeah,
with them
yeah,
when they took over, when they assumed the throne. So
yeah,
it's the 18th century that Christmas trees even make it to the United Kingdom.
yeah.
So
And
it's
we do have the log. The log comes in to Dublin with the Norse influence. So we do have the log, the Yule log and stuff in Ireland from the arrival of the Vikings and stuff. So that would have been a part. And even on top of that, it depended where in Ireland, what kind of connections and stuff. And slowly but surely, and people would have then had their own local interpretation of the Yule log and stuff. And different celebrations to around it. So depending on where you are in Ireland, every village had their own little interpretation of what's going on. Even today, as we were saying with the three wise men in Mallow, one person gives a hurdy stick, the
yep.
next person gives a school book, and then the third person gets the cake that grandma would have made the previous night and then gives it to Jesus. Like, imagine if you were coming from Florence in the medieval period, and that's the type of interpretation that we had in Mallow. To be honest with you, I have no clue if that's how they did it in Mallow in the medieval period, but one could imagine, and my point being is that every area had their own interpretation. So you can imagine being in Florence and rocking up, and there's a book from the Book of Kells a hurley stick and then a cake given to Jesus, and he's used to all this other stuff, and he's like, that's clearly wrong. Like your interpretation of, and he probably
A
would have thought it
hurley
was some
stick.
form of heresy or something, like.
Well, I will say though that if an Irishman had brought a hurley stick to Florence in the 15th century, that would have been given pride of place in their curio cabinet,
Oh,
because
that's good.
the 15th century is when the Italians are starting to collect things,
Mm.
odd things, ancient things, and they're starting to develop their cabinets of curiosities. So a hurley stick, that would have been a weird one.
Yeah, the problem is that Fitzgerald's would have been like, they would have looked at the hurley stick at the time and been like, oh well, that's just a stick. For the Florence and stuff, it would have been a book, because the Irish were really proud, as you know yourself, with the likes of the Book of Kells and stuff, and how their high standard of calligraphy was with the drawings and stuff.
Right.
And then as we enter into the late medieval period with the likes of the poet Fitzgerald, was it Garrod, the third Earl of what was it? The third Earl of Desmond, the poet Fitzgerald. He was extremely proud of the high standard from the early medieval period. So when he comes into the late medieval period, he wants to really advertise this. So he's doing a lot of literature with the really good high standard of calligraphy, and then all of the nice, beautiful
The
drawings and stuff they would
illuminations,
have had
yeah.
around it. Yeah, the illuminations, that's the one. And that would be a gift that you may see if the Fitzgeralds were going to give a gift. So that would be quite interesting to hunt
So
down if we
would have
ever make
so
it
that
over.
gift also, the Italians were definitely book collectors,
Yeah.
as were the Burgundians. Actually, Margaret of York was a massive book collector, so they would have absolutely welcomed something as beautiful as an illuminated book. I mean, who wouldn't?
Yeah. Because in Ireland right now, we're trying to, because obviously, as I was saying, a lot of the literature, sadly, had been destroyed in Ireland, first and foremost by the likes of the arrival of Henry VIII, who
Right.
destroys loads of
Worst
literature in
king in
Ireland.
English history.
Then you would have had book of the Armagh Chalice. Yeah, the Armagh Chalice would have been given as a nice gift during the early medieval period. So you do have a lot of gifts like the Armagh Chalice, given up as gift giving. I'm not sure so much about the late medieval period, because the thing about the late medieval period is they're trying to romanticize what they love about the golden age of Ireland in the early medieval period, because it's an age of the resurgence. So, for my interpretation, and I'm up for correction on this, is that they would have really highlighted the books because they're very proud of their Irish monks. And this is why you see the resurgence. And what's crazy about it is that they still, like the rest of Europe with the Renaissance, they're passing out the Romans. That's not the case in Ireland. If you look at the books that are made in the early medieval period, the standard, like the Book of Kells, once it gets up there,
Yeah.
the Irish just cannot pass the standards of the Book of Kells. Like, it really is peak level of the literature standard that they do during the Golden Age of Ireland. And that's when people say, what is the Golden Age of Ireland? It's the books, like the books, the illumination and the artwork that's in it is just top quality. That's why people all over the world come to Ireland. They want to see the Book of Kells. They want to see that peak of the Golden Age of Ireland. And so when the Fitzgeralds take back over the country, well, the realm, in the late medieval period, that's like the likes of the Port Fitzgerald and stuff. That's what he's trying to rekindle in Ireland, this level. But they never pass out so far from the finds that we have, there's no proof that they ever passed out the Book of Kells. The Book of Kells really does highlight that this was the golden age of saints and scholars. And so that's what they're trying to do. And you can find what they're trying to do now, because so much literature has been destroyed in Ireland. We now have Irish historians going out into Europe. They're trying to make their contacts and stuff, because they're trying to go through other people's archives, because they're trying to
Right.
find these gifts. Or monks, because you also have monks that came into Europe during the Dark Ages, to re-educate the Europeans. And when they were there, they're doing all these beautiful books, these beautiful illuminations and stuff. And that's what they're trying to. Irish historians right now, academics, are going into Europe, trying to make their contacts and stuff, and trying to get into these libraries so they can find these books and study them. And so far, they're really hitting gold. There's a lot of places throughout Europe where they're finding these books and these masterpieces and stuff. And so that would have been definitely a gift number one gift the Irish would have given is a book, because they really want to show off this high level of literature that the Irish have, in their opinion, the greatest. Well, yeah, during the medieval period, the likes of the Armagh Chalice, and there's a few other gifts that would have been given amongst themselves. A lot of people do note that the Irish are not ones for, like a lot of cultures in Iberia, modern day Spain and Portugal, in Italy, in England, when they want to show off their magnificent power and wealth, they go big. Like they have these big skyscrapers, big buildings. They're doing all the other stuff as well, but the Irish are so hemmed in and focused of these gifts. They're mad into their Armagh chalice and stuff, but the books are number one. So if a gift was given during the 12 days of Christmas and stuff, hopefully it would be a book, and hopefully then we can then study to get another glimpse into what medieval life would have been like for the Irish, because with that they would have, we can then look at their interpretation, even the interpretation of the likes of the stories that they would have really glorified, which is the likes of the stories of Finn McCool, the stories of Cuchulainn, but then their interpretation of Cuchulainn, of Finn McCool and stuff, because as we were saying earlier, they're not drawing or giving an interpretation from the early medieval period. They're drawing from the 15th century.
Right.
It would have been absolutely amazing to see what armor and their interpretation of the usage of armor would have been like in the 15th century, because they're not looking at a early medieval version of Cuchulainn or Fergus. Sorry,
Right. No, they depict it as they understood the world to be.
yeah.
Yeah.
Which if we found something like that in history,
Oh, I
like
know.
it would be
It is
absolutely
it is
magnificent.
it is just so frustrating to try to study medieval Irish clothing.
Yeah. With so much being destroyed, yeah, trying to find all these gifts that we may have been given out, that would be a gem. That would be absolutely a find. And it's stuff, even this week, if we look at the news, um, we find that there's I can't remember specifically where, it's up in the Northern Ireland. And we have academics right now looking at a literature that was destroyed, but with modern technology, we're actually trying to bring it back to life right now with modern technology and stuff. Because the peeling, the biggest problem that they're having right now is trying to peel the pages,
Right,
because
yeah.
about 10, 20 years ago, if you peeled the page, you would have destroyed it.
It was
But with modern
destroyed.
technology, they're
You
actually
can use it.
finding new ways to try to strip the two letters of the page, because we
Right.
most of our leather in Ireland would have been made from calf hide, but they're kind of stuck together and stuff. But we're finding new techniques to try to slip it out so we can find the information. And also, they've also found another trick as well in the last 10, 20 years to try to scan it to find the written information in
Yeah,
between.
the
You're right there,
imaging
Bella.
imaging has really taken our study of archaeology to a new
Yeah.
level, because it's not invasive.
Yeah, yeah, and the thing is as well, and this is quite frustrating then, where we're trying to get it to the most of the population, is that the media then doesn't explain it properly. So we go into the Irish literature and we find all this new information, and we're suddenly like, oh my god, we were wrong. It's actually A, B, and C. We have to tell the public. The media then get the information, and oh my god, the media always make a complete mess of the information going out, and then people go mad at it. It's like, oh, what are the academics doing in the universities? Like, do they know nothing? Are they stupid? And it's not realizing it, that it's actually the
It's the
media,
filter,
like on
yeah.
RTE, the newspapers and stuff. Because I remember I was in UCC a few years back when a lot of information had gotten out to the public. And I was like, oh my God, they can't wait to find out. And then I remember reading it in the newspaper, and I was like, the newspaper's got this all wrong. All of this information is completely wrong. And I remember then
Yeah.
going on Facebook and I was reading the comments, and people were going mad. They were like, what are the people in the academics? What are the academics doing in these universities? We're paying taxpayers' money, and they're just making up all kinds of voodoo stuff, not realizing that actually this is amazing information that's really rewriting our own history. So in the next few weeks as well, because it's only this week that a few more books up in the north of Ireland, we've actually found tricks to actually slip the vellum, as they were saying in the comment section. We've managed to divide that apart so we're able to read the new information. Just looking at the comment section there, any tips for books about Irish medieval history? Um, God.
Audiobooks preferred.
Audiobooks. Oh,
Ooh,
that's difficult one for Irish because
Irish medieval history.
which is pretty much ran by the Four Courts. So if you quickly look over to the Four Courts website, a lot of that stuff, there's a few stuff that slips onto Amazon and
Mm.
stuff, but the majority of stuff, first and foremost, they only sell it on the Four Courts website. But they're all big, thick academic books that you could only get as um, hard books. So sadly, we don't have too much stuff that's audiobooks. Not that I can think of academic standard wise. I'll have to let me actually get back to you on that one. Might have a quick look right now, but I don't think there's too
Mm.
much good standard audiobooks that's in, sadly. And I have a friend who actually gave out about that as well. What was it? Last summer, I was with a friend of mine wanted to learn more about Irish medieval history. And I was telling him this, and he was like, "This is why you're not making any money." And I was like, "Yeah."
I mean,
um,
what's your view on how the Irish saved civilization? Because that does have an audiobook.
I
And
love
that
that.
certainly focuses hard on medieval history. So
Uh, I absolutely love that book. It's been a good few years since I actually sat down and read that book. But it is a really, really good book. I didn't realize you could get that on audio, but if you can
it,
get
it
that on
was
audio,
it was
definitely
definitely
get that
I
book.
listened to it in my father's car growing up.
Yeah.
So
How
yeah.
the Irish saved civilization, definitely. As they call it in England, they renamed it, and they renamed some of the books as
Oh
well to
right.
I
How
think
the
it's how the
right.
Celts saved civilization. And the
Yeah, right.
BBC funded the documentary "How the Celts Saved." Yeah, yeah, they actually completely renamed it. So it was originally called "How the Irish Saved Civilization," but the BBC wouldn't fund both the book and the documentary on that until it was renamed. So they had to rename it
Yeah.
to "How the Celts Saved Britain: A New Civilization." So you can pretty much find most of the same civil. Oh, it's so funny. It was a friend of mine was telling me this, or it was not. It was. I'm trying to find the historian who, because he pretty much rewritten a lot of the stuff for the British audience. Dan Snow. It was Dan Snow was telling us. So Dan Snow, he was. We met Dan Snow a few years back doing the living history and stuff. And
Typical
Dan
BBC.
Snow, it was Dan Snow that went to the BBC. He was looking for funding. Typical the BBC. Yes, always with the agendas with the BBC. Always with the agendas. You can never have it straight with them. So Dan Snow goes up to the BBC and he's looking funding to bring the history hit. History is not too bad. I'll get back to history hit in a second. But anyway, Dan Snow goes up to the BBC and he's looking for funding for doing the live documentary. So he wants to actually drive around Europe and Britain to bring the book alive, How the Irish Saved Civilization. And when he goes up to them, he really wants to do this book, How the Irish Saved Civilization. And so he pitches it to the BBC to get funding. And the BBC are like, "Oh, yeah, yeah, that's great, that's great, that's great." Until one fella in the room is like, "That's great and everything, but we won't fund you until you change the name to How the Irish Saved Civilization to How the Celts Saved Britain." And at first, Dan Snow is not having any of this. He wants to have it called How the Irish Saved Civilization, and he wants to quote it back to the original book. That's how Dan Snow has it. But the BBC, they would not relent. So eventually, Dan Snow had to change it to How the Celts Saved Civilization. And Dan Snow, even today, Dan Snow still bitches about that. Um, he was even like, I remember he was in Ireland and he was bitching to us about 5 to 10 years ago. He was bitching to us about that, how the BBC wouldn't fund him for that one. But the problem is with the BBC is that there's a few old school heads in there that would not relent, and that's how Dan Snow had to work with. The History Hit, on the other hand, they're way better to work with the way that they're organized and stuff right now. It's Dermot Scully. I haven't talked to Dermot Scully since about it and stuff, but Dermot Scully is on their new documentary. He actually taught me in University of Cork. Dermot Scully, all you guys would absolutely love him. Dermot Scully specializes on, sorry, I dropped the phone there, on Gerald of Wales and his interpretation
Oh,
on
Gerald of
Ireland.
Wales. Right.
Yes. And so Dermot Scully specializes in all that. And recently, History Hit hired Dermot Scully, and he's actually on the trailer. I actually put the short up on my channel, so you guys can check that out. Um, it's one of the shorts there. Let me have a quick look. It is a while back. It's last week. So if you look at my shorts from last week, Castles That Made Ireland. So Dermot Scully, who was my academic, he taught me how to study and research. He actually worked with me for one of my degrees, one of my projects for my degree on the how to read literature in 1641, which was really, really difficult. I had to sit down and I had to go through all of the literature. It was so difficult to read. And the problem is as well, because this was read by people who weren't that educated, everybody had their own interpretation on how to do different spellings and stuff. So I had to sit there and literally do a lot of guesswork on and rewrite it on a piece of paper on what they were trying to say, because it was like Google and all this stuff. But it was Dermot Scully that sat down with me and explained how to work with this literature and stuff back in 2018. So sorry, 2017. So it was a few years back now. That myself and Dermot Scully sat down and went through this. But he's recently, in the last few months, Dermot Scully and Dave Swift, who I both worked with separately on two separate things altogether, they've both been hired by History Hit. So they're actually working for History Hit right now. Dave Swift, who specializes in the gallo glass. So if you're into the gallo glass and stuff, Dave Swift is actually famous. He's kind of like secretly famous all over the internet for his work on the gallo glass, because everybody this person else. So that's Dave Swift.
That's
So
pretty
Dave
funny.
Swift is on History Hit. Yeah, it's wild. So Dave Swift and Dermot Scully have both been hired in the last 2 weeks by History Hit. So their documentary now is up on the History Hit. I think it's what's the streaming service, because they have their own streaming service as well.
They do, yeah.
Is it called History Hit?
It's called History Hit, yeah.
So yeah, hired by History Hit to do the documentary on Castles That Made Ireland, which is now live on History Hit. And also, David Scully has done a few interviews with the. So they also have the Medieval podcast as well up, which is free, by the way. All you have to do is go on to look up Medieval podcast, and then if you go down, you can find Dermot Scully talking about, I think it's the interview on Trim Castle, and in that Dermot Scully gives a little bit of a talk on Gerald of Wales and his interpretation of Ireland, which is absolutely magnificent. Yeah, Rachel, anything else?
Oh, goodness. No, I think my closing statement is I wish we celebrated Christmas now the way we did 600 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. We're starting to slow down now because we've already smashed out all of the 12 days.
Yeah.
Any questions in the audience before we start wrapping it up? Single is, lucky we're actually starting to finish up now because we're starting to have the drop in the single. Any questions in the audience, guys, before we wrap it up? Rachel, anything else you want to elaborate on?
Yeah, so while we're waiting for final questions, I will relate two funny things I noticed I've discovered over the years in researching medieval Christmas practices. The further north you go, the scarier they get, and I mean that literally. So in Scandinavia, they had they took the disguisings where people wore masks and went through the streets and sang, but they took it to the next level of horror. They started wearing scary masks, and this is during Christmas, and they would have the Yule goat. And the Yule goat was a person who dressed up like a scary monster goat demon with a tail with bells and everything. And the Yule goat would go, and this started really heavily in the 16th century, would go from house to house and demand to be invited in and demand to be given things. And if he wasn't, and the goat would apparently go around and scream at people. And apparently children develop PTSD from this Yule goat. Yeah, like it would literally terrorize these children.
Yeah, I can't say anything because we do the same thing in Ireland, and it's also big here in Japan as well to get people to dress up as monsters and chase the children and stuff around the place. But at the same time, does actually work. Even in Poland today, they have festivals where they dress up as monsters and chase children around Christmas.
Yeah, and that's and that's
Um,
that's a thing that's done in the north of Europe, but it's not done in the south. And then in
yeah,
Iceland, they have Christmas trolls. So Christmas is associated in the sagas with people getting destroyed and eaten by trolls. So, this in the south it's associated with celebration and revelry, and in the north it's all of this ghostly horror. Um, it's yeah, that's where you get past the church trappings and into sort of the local culture, the local pagan practices that have survived. So yeah, it's an interesting topic.
we have one. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. It gets a bit wild. We try to stay away from the wild stuff altogether. In the comment section there, I know it's mad. Imagine putting a tree up in your living room for the first time. Everyone must have thought they were mad. And yeah, I don't delve too much into 17th and 18th century and 19th century literature too much. But from what I've actually seen in books and stuff, yeah, I remember when it was, you were saying earlier, wasn't it one of the British princesses or something? She brings in the first Christmas tree
The
into Britain.
The
And even the king at the
Hanoverians
time was
bring
like,
them.
what?
It's the
Yeah,
Hanoverians
yeah,
because
yeah,
they're
yeah.
from they're
Mm,
from they're from Germany basically, and that's where Christmas trees are a thing, and they bring the
yeah,
practice
yeah.
with them. And then Victoria like supercharges that whole idea.
Oh, yeah. So she would have
And
definitely
she's
enforced
German.
Christians.
Most
I
people
do.
don't
Oh,
realize she's a
I
German
don't.
princess.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. Queen Victoria is such a complicated character in Irish history because people couldn't eat at the time, and Queen Victoria couldn't
Oh yeah, the
understand
potato
why people are
famine.
not eating.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then she's enforcing all this wild festival stuff. So she is really controversial in Ireland because of her lack of understanding of what is happening with the Irish people. She's just like she's I remember the French have a little thing as well for what was it, Marie Antoinette, when she allegedly said, "Why can't they eat cake?" And Queen Victoria and the Irish,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah,
same sort of thing.
unfortunately, that's not what Marie Antoinette meant. But
Mm,
yeah, so this comment is, I still think it's weird putting a tree in your house. So even though the Christmas tree wasn't a form of decoration in most places in Christmas in Europe, bringing greens into the house was a practice throughout all of Europe because
mm,
the
mm,
idea is that it's dark, things are dying, the
yeah,
world is brown, and so you go into the forest and you find what's left alive and you bring it
mm,
into your home to bring
yeah,
in the sense of life. So,
mm,
holly in Italy, especially laurel leaves are an evergreen. Most people don't know that.
mm,
Holly leaves, mistletoe, laurel leaves. Did I say holly leaves? Laurel leaves are an evergreen. Laurel leaves, holly
yeah,
leaves, mistletoe, and ivy.
mm,
Ivy. But that's kind of like everywhere in Europe. They go into the forest and they find whatever's still alive and green and they bring it back to decorate. So even if it wasn't a tree, it was
mm,
still a lot of greenery that was, festooned everywhere, draped
yeah,
over tables, over
yeah,
if you had a fireplace from the ceilings. So
mm,
I guess it's like easier to just bring in the whole tree rather than go and cut branches. I don't know.
mm, mm. Because it was definitely done in Ireland. Like I reckon it's still debated and stuff before the coming of the Vikings, how much they got involved with the decoration and the festives before the arrival of the Vikings. But I could really imagine the fact that with the festival of the sun god and all this stuff, with the solstice festival and stuff, that people were decorating their homes and stuff before the arrival of the Vikings. But once the Vikings arrived, that's when you see more festive going on, and from there, Christmas gets bigger and bigger and bigger in Ireland,
Right.
especially when you come up to the 15th century, because just before, as we're going into the 15th century, you would have had Richard II, who actually spent a lot of money as a status to the Irish. That look at me. I can have these big, humongous Christmas festivals on in Dublin. Aren't the English so civilized and powerful?
Right.
So even when the English are coming in, occupying Dublin, they're purposely having these humongous festivals. And then obviously because the Fitzgeralds and the Yorkists don't want to be outdone by this unwanted king that ends up being starved to death, like he was a complete
Yeah.
failure.
Poor
That's the
Richard
imagery of the
II.
Fitzgeralds. That's the imagery that the Fitzgeralds and the Yorkists want to put in. When they take over Dublin, they continue to make it bigger and greater. So
Right.
you constantly in Ireland, before you know it, Christmas becomes more important than Easter, especially when we get into the period when Cromwell comes in, and then just outright bans it.
Right.
So just as Christmas starts to outpeak Easter, it's banned by Cromwell as he's in the middle of trying to blow up our castles and kill all our nobles and stuff. Like, amazing guy.
In fairness,
Right.
that's what he's doing in England too, just royalists. He's
Yeah, he sure does like canceling Christmas and blowing people up. Um, I watch from the start. Well, if you have any questions, being a part of the 12 days of Christmas, if you have any questions to do with medieval Christmas, just put them below. I don't mind re-waffling about everything. I just a few things, all right. Like, I still think it's weird putting a tree in your house. I like it though. I like all the Christmas decorations and stuff. It is strange, especially if you're an alien and you just came from space and you came down and you're seeing this weird stuff, and then we suddenly cut down a tree and we dump it in the middle of our house and decorate it. Like, so yeah, if you're a space alien, I can see why you think it's strange, but I like it. I like all the weird stuff. Um, not not an intelligent. What do you mean by that? Oh, well. Anything else you would like to elaborate on, Rachel?
No, I think we've pretty much covered all the points. Christmas was a 12-day
Mm,
holiday. There was lots of revelry in some form or another, no matter where you lived in medieval Europe. The specifics varied. Oh, and the
yeah.
food. The food varied too. So, in England you have the hog's head, the
Mm,
boar's head, but that's not something that was necessarily served universally. In fact, Henry
yeah.
V, one Christmas he had porpoise at his Christmas
Mm,
feast because
yeah. Yeah.
real local dish apparently.
Mm.
So it's Christmas. Christmas was an exciting time, and I think we can make Christmas exciting again.
Yeah, we can, hopefully. When it comes down to food, it depends on the influence on where you're coming from, because with the southeast of the country, which is more influenced by the Anglo-Irish side of things, it would have been, the English and French, and then up around Cork and what was it, the Kerry area, you would have also had the Iberian influences coming in with the food and the different ways they would have celebrated. And then up in the northwest of the country, you would have had that Gaelic and Scandinavian influence coming in and different interpretations, and with that, different food because of the trade. So not only are they bringing the different interpretations of Christmas, but they're also bringing in different food types
Right.
as well. And obviously, you would have had the whole conspiracy with paganism and stuff. So it would have been the much more earlier culture and pagan ideas of that local area would have also stood true, because a lot of people are like, well, I like doing this thing on Christmas. I'm going to still do it because my dad did it and his dad did it. So I'm going to do it too. I'm going to dress up as a little elf and start scaring children.
Right.
Depending on where you're from. That would have
Yeah,
been the
exactly
tradition
right.
that people would have held on to. So we can't just look at Christmas as okay, so if they did this thing in Dublin, then they did it through all of Ireland. No, that's not true. One village would have had their customs and ways, depending, even on the days. Like, you would have had some places in Ireland would have been dead quiet. A lot of our places in Ireland, for a good chunk of the medieval period, would have been, just common prayers and stuff. And then more closer you got up to Dublin, the more, as we expand into the medieval period, the more crazier you would have gotten and stuff. So that's quite interesting in itself. If there's no more questions in the comment section, and Rachel is pretty much educated us on all the little quirks of European history, we might just call it a night over
I
in
think
Ireland
so.
and New York and start saying goodbye to everyone. I want to thank everyone that came today from my side of things. As Rachel was saying earlier, I definitely, because we were busy over the Christmas festival and stuff, we didn't really have too much time to prepare for today, although two of our notes were perfectly perfect for today. Next week, what was it for Monday? Definitely Tuesday. we'll have an idea of what we'll be doing next week. Because we'll be doing this again next week with a different team and a different thing. So definitely comment below on what you would like us to talk about next week. But from us, we'd like to say Slán go bhfuilte. See you later, guys. Bye. Oh,
Bye,
and also,
everyone.
I'd like to thank Rachel's fans for coming in today. Definitely helped out at the start of the stream. So definitely thank you guys. And I'd like to thank Rachel as well. I almost forgot all about
Oh,
that.
thank you for having me. It's been fun. Look forward to next
Oh,
week.
and definitely. We'll be on next week as well. Anyway, guys, thanks for everything. Slán go bhfuilte.
Bye,
See you.
everyone. Bye.
Bye. Bye. Okay, now how do I exit out of this? Bye, guys. All right, end. Yes.